Somewhere between what ancient people built and what time allowed to survive, an entire world went missing. We are left with pieces of it, enormous stones resting in improbable places, temples opening toward distant horizons, stairways descending beneath the earth, and abandoned structures whose original purpose has become difficult to recover. Once, every detail had meaning. Every passage led somewhere. Every symbol was understood. Thousands of years later, we can see the result, but much of the story behind it has vanished. Archaeology continues to uncover new fragments, sometimes answering questions that have endured for centuries, sometimes creating entirely new ones. Today, we journey through these remarkable remnants, following the clues left by civilizations that disappeared while their greatest mysteries remained. Hue Royal Tombs sits beside the Perfume River in central Vietnam, where annual rainfall can exceed 3,000 millimeters and humidity often stays above 80%. Yet some of these royal structures have resisted mold, flooding, foundation collapse, and material decay for nearly 2 centuries. Beneath the stone courtyards and silent lakes, researchers believe an entire system of forgotten engineering may still be hidden underground. The royal tombs were constructed during the Nguyen dynasty between the early 1800s and the early 1900s, but modern scientific investigation accelerated during French surveys in the late 19th century, and conservation studies after UNESCO recognized the Hue complex as a World Heritage Site in 1993. Archaeologists, architects, hydrologists, and material scientists soon realized these were not ordinary burial monuments. Many of the engineering methods used inside the tombs appeared unusually advanced for a tropical environment considered one of the harshest in Southeast Asia. The greatest mystery surrounding the Hue Royal Tombs may not be hidden treasure or secret chambers. It may be the walls themselves. Hue experiences one of the wettest climates in Vietnam. Seasonal storms from the East Sea regularly flood surrounding regions, while persistent moisture creates ideal conditions for fungal growth, salt expansion, and structural decay. In similar climates, ancient stone and brick structures often deteriorate rapidly. Angkor Wat in Cambodia, for example, constantly battles biological erosion from moss and moisture. Maya ruins in Central America suffer from root penetration and humidity damage. Even European castles exposed to lower humidity often develop deep mold contamination within centuries. Yet several Nguyen dynasty tombs continue to resist these conditions in ways that remain difficult to fully explain. At Tomb of Min Mang and Tomb of Tu Duc, conservation teams discovered sections of wall structures that still maintain surprisingly stable internal moisture levels despite constant exposure to heavy rainfall. Some corridors remain significantly drier than expected, even during monsoon seasons. Scientists studying the ancient mortar found evidence of lime-based mixtures combined with organic additives. Historical records mention ingredients such as molasses, plant resin, paper pulp, shell lime, and natural oils. Similar techniques existed in other ancient civilizations. Roman concrete famously used volcanic ash to create long-lasting marine structures. Persian engineers developed sarouge, a waterproof mortar capable of surviving desert temperature extremes. Ancient Chinese builders sometimes mixed sticky rice into lime mortar to increase strength and flexibility. But the Nguyen formula appears adapted specifically for tropical humidity. Microscopic analysis suggests the mortar contains interconnected pore structures capable of allowing vapor to escape outward, while reducing liquid water penetration inward. In modern engineering, this principle resembles breathable wall technology used in sustainable architecture today. The question is how 19th century Vietnamese builders achieved this without modern chemistry. Some researchers suspect generations of local craftsmen accumulated environmental knowledge through trial and error, eventually creating materials optimized for monsoon climates. Others believe certain formulas may have been state-protected secrets known only to royal construction guilds. What makes the mystery even deeper is that many restoration attempts using modern cement have performed worse than the original materials. Concrete repairs added during the 20th century sometimes trapped moisture inside walls, accelerating decay rather than stopping it. In several cases, the ancient mortar continued functioning more effectively than modern replacements. This paradox has led conservation experts to compare Hugh's lost mortar technology to the enduring mysteries of Roman concrete, a material science achievement partially lost for centuries. The tombs were built in terrain considered highly unstable for monumental architecture. The soil around Hua contains water-saturated clay layers vulnerable to erosion and subsidence, especially during flood seasons. Yet many royal tombs remain structurally balanced after nearly 200 years. At Tomb of Min Mang, researchers identified carefully engineered water channels hidden beneath pathways and ceremonial courtyards. These systems appear designed to redirect groundwater pressure away from foundations while controlling runoff during heavy storms. Instead of resisting water directly, the builders may have engineered the landscape to cooperate with it. This principle resembles hydraulic strategies seen at Angkor in Cambodia, where reservoirs and canals stabilized urban water flow, or the floating agricultural systems used by the Aztecs around Tenochtitlan. But the Hue tombs applied similar environmental engineering on a funerary and ceremonial scale. Several sections of foundation also reveal layered construction using compacted earth, crushed stone, sand, charcoal and clay. Modern geotechnical engineers believe these layers may have functioned like primitive drainage membranes, dispersing pressure and improving stability during seasonal flooding. Some underground passages mentioned in local accounts have never been fully excavated. Legends claim hidden tunnels once connected certain royal structures, possibly serving ceremonial, defensive, or drainage purposes. Ground-penetrating radar surveys in limited areas have revealed anomalies beneath some courtyards, though full-scale excavation remains restricted for preservation and spiritual reasons. One of the strangest experiences reported by visitors is the sudden temperature shift inside certain sections of the tomb complexes. Even during humid summer days exceeding 35 degrees Celsius, shaded corridors near lakes and stone gateways often feel noticeably cooler. This effect was not accidental. The tomb builders carefully combined water surfaces, vegetation density, stone orientation, wind corridors, and thermal mass to create passive cooling systems. Long corridors channel airflow while ponds stabilize surrounding temperatures through evaporative cooling. Thick stone and brick walls absorb heat slowly during the day and release it gradually at night. Modern architects call this climate-responsive architecture. Ancient Persian yakhchals used similar principles to preserve ice in deserts. Middle Eastern wind towers redirected airflow into buildings centuries before electric ventilation existed. But adapting passive cooling to humid tropical conditions is far more difficult than using it in dry climates. The Nguyen engineers appear to have understood local wind behavior with remarkable precision. Some tomb layouts align with seasonal airflow patterns descending from nearby hills toward the Perfume River basin. This may explain why certain areas remain unexpectedly comfortable despite the oppressive humidity surrounding them. Tomb of Khai Din contains one of the most complex ceramic mosaic systems in Asia. Millions of tiny porcelain and glass fragments were embedded onto curved surfaces, columns, ceilings, and walls with extraordinary precision. More than a century later, many sections still reflect light intensely, despite constant exposure to moisture and heat. The engineering challenge is enormous. Ceramic mosaics normally crack under repeated thermal expansion, especially in tropical climates. European mosaic works from similar periods often experience severe detachment and water infiltration over time, yet Kaidin's tomb shows unusually higher adhesion durability. Some conservation experts believe the adhesive layers beneath the mosaics may contain flexible organic compounds, allowing microscopic expansion and contraction without catastrophic cracking. Others suspect the builders intentionally varied mortar density beneath different decorative sections to distribute stress more evenly. Modern spectral analysis has also revealed complex reflective behavior in certain glazed fragments, producing shifting visual effects depending on sunlight angles. In some corridors, surfaces appear almost luminous during humid afternoons, a phenomenon partially caused by moisture interacting with reflective ceramic glazing. Perhaps the darkest mystery surrounding the Hugh royal tombs is whether the visible tombs truly contain the emperors at all. Historical rumors claim the actual burial locations were deliberately concealed. According to some accounts, workers involved in royal burials were relocated afterward to protect secrecy. Similar legends surround China's first emperor Qin Shi Huang and several Egyptian pharaohs. The most persistent stories involve Tomb of Tuduk, where local traditions describe hidden chambers and false burial sites designed to confuse grave robbers. No definitive archaeological proof has confirmed these stories. However, several unexplored zones beneath ceremonial platforms remain inaccessible due to structural risks and spiritual concerns. If hidden chambers still exist, they may contain not only royal remains, but also lost construction records explaining the technologies behind the tombs themselves. Do you think the Hugh royal tombs were built using forgotten engineering knowledge far ahead of their time? Or are these mysteries simply the result of centuries of lost craftsmanship? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Euphrates River in eastern Syria, Dura Europos Synagogue remained hidden beneath desert sand for nearly 1,700 years. What emerged was not just an ancient synagogue, but one of the most scientifically puzzling archaeological discoveries ever made. A building whose wall paintings, engineering methods, and underground warfare technology seem centuries ahead of their time. The site of Dura Europos was first identified in the 1920s after British soldiers accidentally uncovered painted walls while digging military trenches near the Euphrates. Major excavations led by Yale University and French archaeologist Franz Cumont soon revealed an entire Roman frontier city buried beneath layers of desert sand. In 1932, archaeologists entered a modest-looking synagogue structure and discovered something completely unexpected. Nearly every interior wall was covered with massive, vividly coloured paintings dating to around 244 CE. At the time, many scholars believed ancient Jewish religious spaces avoided large-scale figurative imagery entirely. Dura Europos shattered that assumption overnight. But the real mystery was not the paintings themselves. It was how they survived. The murals inside the synagogue are among the best-preserved ancient paintings ever discovered from the Roman East. Scenes depicting Moses, Ezekiel, David, and other biblical figures still retain visible reds, blacks, yellows, whites, and traces of blue despite almost 2 millennia underground. Under normal archaeological conditions, this level of preservation should have been nearly impossible. Ancient pigments usually decay because of humidity, salt crystallization, oxidation, microorganisms, and thermal stress. In desert border environments like Syria, walls commonly crack from extreme temperature swings exceeding 35 degrees Celsius between day and night. Salts migrate through stone and plaster, eventually destroying paint layers from within. Yet many of Dura Europos' murals survived with astonishing clarity. Modern microscopic analysis found that the artists used layered mineral pigments mixed with unusually stable binders. Researchers identified hematite for reds, carbon black for dark outlines, gypsum-rich white bases, and complex copper-based compounds in some blue-green sections. What shocked conservation scientists was the structure of the paint itself. Some pigments were applied in multiple microscopic layers over carefully prepared lime plaster surfaces, creating a chemically stabilized barrier that reduced flaking and trapped color particles inside the wall matrix. In some areas, the plaster appears to have undergone partial carbonation similar to true fresco techniques later perfected in Byzantine and Renaissance painting. That timeline creates a major problem. The synagogue predates many famous Byzantine mural traditions by centuries. Even more mysterious, comparative studies with nearby Roman-era sites show far worse deterioration elsewhere. Murals from other Syrian and Mesopotamian structures of similar age often lost over 70–90% of their pigmentation. At Dura Europos, entire narrative scenes remained recognizable. Some experts argue the preservation was simply accidental. The city became rapidly buried after the Sasanian siege of 256 CE, sealing the walls in dry sand before moisture could destroy them. But that explanation does not fully solve the puzzle. Dry burial alone cannot explain why the paint adhered so effectively to the plaster in the first place. Certain wall sections show evidence of intentional moisture management. The builders may have understood how to balance lime alkalinity, plaster porosity, and mineral absorption rates with a sophistication rarely associated with frontier settlements of the 3rd century. In modern conservation science, controlling salt migration and moisture diffusion is one of the hardest challenges in preserving murals. Dura Europos may have solved part of that problem nearly 2,000 years ago. One of archaeology's biggest enemies is salt. When water moves through porous walls, dissolved salts crystallize beneath the painted surface. As crystals expand, they generate enough pressure to fracture stone and detach paint layers. This process has destroyed murals everywhere from Egypt to Pompeii. Yet the synagogue's interior walls resisted catastrophic salt damage for centuries. Chemical studies on plaster samples revealed unusual mixtures of gypsum, lime, silica-rich sand, and clay components. Some researchers believe the wall system functioned almost like a passive humidity regulator. Instead of trapping moisture, the plaster may have slowly released vapor outward, while preventing rapid salt concentration beneath the paint. That concept resembles advanced moisture control strategies seen in later Persian Sarouge waterproof mortars or even some Roman hydraulic concretes. But the formula at Dura Europos does not precisely match either technology. Its composition appears locally adapted and experimentally optimized. Even more puzzling, sections of the synagogue remain structurally stable despite centuries of thermal stress. Modern cement structures in arid climates often develop severe cracking within decades because rigid materials expand and contract unevenly. The synagogue walls behave differently. Their layered plaster system may have distributed thermal stress gradually across multiple surfaces, reducing fracture propagation. In engineering terms, it functioned more like a flexible composite system than a simple ancient wall. That level of material understanding should not have existed in a remote desert frontier city. Dura Europos was not only a religious center, it was also a heavily fortified Roman military outpost positioned near the eastern frontier of the empire. Beneath the city, archaeologists discovered tunnels associated with the final Sasanian-Persian siege around 256 CE. Inside one collapsed tunnel, excavators found the bodies of nearly 20 Roman soldiers piled together in unnatural positions. Nearby were residues of sulfur crystals and bitumen. This led historian Simon James to propose one of the most controversial theories in ancient military history. The Persians may have used an early form of chemical warfare. According to the reconstruction, Sasanian troops intentionally burned sulfur and bitumen in confined underground spaces. The reaction would have produced sulfur dioxide and possibly hydrogen sulfide gases. In enclosed tunnels with minimal ventilation, those gases could rapidly incapacitate or suffocate defenders. Experiments with reconstructed combustion conditions suggest lethal concentrations may have formed within minutes. If correct, Dura Europus preserves one of the earliest archaeological examples of chemical warfare ever discovered. But the engineering behind the tunnels is equally disturbing. The Persians carefully positioned mining shafts beneath defensive walls to weaken foundations without triggering premature collapse. This required advanced understanding of load distribution, soil pressure, and structural failure points. Roman countermeasures attempted to intercept them underground, creating a deadly subterranean battle zone beneath the city itself. The precision of these operations rivals siege engineering techniques documented more than 1,000 years later. Another mystery appears inside the synagogue's interior design. The placement of upper windows creates controlled beams of sunlight that illuminate specific mural zones during parts of the day. Some scenes become dramatically visible only under certain lighting angles. Modern simulations suggest that even small positional shifts in window height or orientation would disrupt the effect entirely. This raises an uncomfortable question. Was the lighting system intentional? If so, the builders possessed highly practical knowledge of solar geometry and interior illumination dynamics long before similar sacred light effects became famous in Byzantine churches and Gothic cathedrals. Unlike many Roman buildings focused primarily on open-air illumination, the synagogue manipulated narrow interior lighting for psychological impact. The result would have transformed worship into something immersive and theatrical. Ancient visitors entering the hall may have watched biblical figures emerge from darkness as sunlight moved across the walls. It was architecture designed not merely to shelter people, but to control perception itself. Do you think Dura Europos is simply a case of natural accidental preservation? Or could it have been a place where ancient civilizations intentionally shared advanced technical knowledge? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The ancient region of Gandhara, where summer temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius and seasonal humidity destroys organic material within decades, produced something almost impossible. Fragile birch bark manuscripts still readable after nearly 2,000 years. These texts, discovered near Hadda and Taxila, were written centuries before most surviving European manuscripts even existed, and yet many retained visible ink, flexible fibers, and structural integrity that modern conservation scientists still struggle to explain. In the 1990s, several sealed clay jars containing tightly rolled birch bark scrolls surfaced from ancient Buddhist monastic sites in the Gandharan region. Radiocarbon dating later placed some manuscripts between the 1st century BCE and the 2nd century CE, making them among the oldest surviving Buddhist texts ever discovered. What shocked researchers was not only the age of the manuscripts, but the condition they remained in despite being made from one of the least durable writing materials imaginable. Birch bark is an organic material composed primarily of cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. Under ordinary environmental conditions, those compounds degrade rapidly through oxidation, fungal invasion, insect activity, and moisture absorption. Modern untreated bark exposed to fluctuating humidity can begin structural breakdown within only a few years. Even museum-preserved bark samples often become brittle after several decades. Yet many Gandharan manuscripts survived for almost 2 millennia. Compared to Egyptian papyrus, birch bark should theoretically perform worse in unstable climates. Papyrus survives mainly in hyper-arid desert environments where humidity remains extremely low. But the Gandharan manuscripts endured seasonal temperature variation, underground moisture, and microbial exposure. Some fragments still retain flexibility today. Conservation teams examining the scrolls found fiber layers that had not completely crystallized or collapsed, something rarely seen in ancient cellulose-based materials of comparable age. This has created one of the strangest material science mysteries in archaeology. How did ancient scribes stabilize a biodegradable surface so effectively that it could outlast medieval parchment in some cases? This is where the mystery becomes far more difficult to explain. Modern laboratory studies confirm that birch bark naturally contains betulin and suberin, compounds that provide limited water resistance and antifungal properties. However, those natural defenses alone are nowhere near strong enough to account for survival across 2,000 years. Under normal burial conditions, microorganisms penetrate cellulose layers, causing irreversible fragmentation. Fungal hyphae usually spread rapidly through organic writing surfaces, especially when trapped underground. But several Gandharan scrolls display surprisingly little deep fungal penetration. Microscopic analysis reveal that some bark surfaces behaved almost like treated composite material, rather than raw organic bark. The outer layers appear unusually compacted, while certain internal fiber structures show signs of controlled thermal alteration. Researchers suspect the bark may have undergone a deliberate stabilization process involving oils, resins, smoke curing, mineral salts, or low-temperature heating. The problem is that no surviving ancient text explains the method. Some conservation scientists have proposed that ancient craftsmen may have used plant oils similar to linseed or cedar extracts to reduce water absorption. Others suspect alkaline mineral treatments that altered the pH balance of the bark surface, slowing microbial growth. A few chemical traces even suggest possible resin coatings comparable to primitive varnishes. If true, this would mean Gandharan craftsmen understood empirical preservation chemistry centuries before the development of formal material science. What makes the mystery even stranger is the uniformity of preservation. These manuscripts were not isolated anomalies. Multiple scrolls from different locations show similar resistance patterns, implying the existence of a standardized production method rather than accidental preservation. Some experts compare the phenomenon to Roman hydraulic concrete. For centuries, historians believed Roman concrete durability was accidental until mineral analysis revealed complex volcanic chemical reactions inside the material. The Gandharan manuscripts may represent a similar case, a lost technological process hidden inside a seemingly primitive artifact. There is also evidence that the scrolls were intentionally stored inside controlled microenvironments. Many were sealed in clay jars with extremely limited airflow. Some jars may have contained organic desiccants capable of reducing internal humidity. This effectively created a primitive climate control system nearly 2,000 years before modern archival storage. Even today, major libraries preserve ancient documents at humidity levels between 30 and 50% to prevent fungal growth and fiber collapse. The Gandharan monks may have discovered practical versions of the same principles entirely through observation and experimentation. The writing itself presents another unresolved puzzle. Most ancient inks degrade aggressively over time. Iron gall ink, widely used in medieval Europe, often destroys the paper it was written on through acid corrosion. Carbon-based inks are more stable, but they usually sit on the surface and gradually flake away as the material beneath deteriorates. The Gandharan manuscripts behave differently. Spectroscopic analysis indicates the use of carbon black mixed with plant gums and trace minerals. But unlike ordinary surface ink, portions of the writing appear partially integrated into the bark fibers themselves. Instead of cracking off, many characters remained sharply visible, even after severe physical fragmentation of the scrolls. Some scientists believe the bark surface may have been chemically prepared before writing, allowing controlled capillary absorption without excessive spreading. In modern terms, this resembles a primitive primer layer used in high-end archival printing. If accurate, the implication is astonishing. Ancient scribes may have engineered both the writing surface and the ink as a unified preservation system. The manuscripts also reveal extraordinary manufacturing consistency. Many strips were cut with near identical width and thickness. Hole alignments used for threading remain remarkably straight over long sections. Line spacing often appears geometrically controlled despite being written entirely by hand. This level of standardization raises difficult questions about production tools. At the time these scrolls were created, the region lacked the industrial cutting systems associated with later manuscript cultures. Yet some bark sheets show cleaner preparation than early medieval European parchment. The surfaces appear carefully flattened without catastrophic fibre tearing, something difficult to achieve even with modern manual processing. Several researchers have argued that workshops producing manuscripts in Kandara may have operated at a far more organized technical level than previously assumed, possibly involving specialized artisans trained specifically in bark treatment and document preservation. One of the strangest parts of the mystery is that the technology seems to vanish from history. Later manuscript traditions across Central Asia, India, and Europe rarely match the same level of preservation. Many medieval papers degraded faster than the Gandharan birchbark scrolls despite being far younger. This suggests the process relied on specialized knowledge that may have disappeared through invasions, political collapse, or the destruction of monastic communities. History has seen similar losses before. Roman concrete formulas vanished for centuries. Damascus steel became impossible to reproduce after medieval trade networks collapsed. The birchbark manuscripts may represent another forgotten technology, one that appeared simple, but depended on an advanced understanding of materials and preservation far ahead of its time. Do you think the survival of the birchbark manuscripts was simply ancient craftsmanship, or evidence of a lost preservation technology far ahead of its time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Northern Vietnam, near the Ma River and Dong Son archaeological site, became the center of one of the most disturbing technological mysteries in the ancient world. Archaeologists uncovered bronze drums so advanced that some researchers still struggle to explain how they were made more than 2,000 years ago. These were not simple ritual objects. Some weighed over 100 kilograms, carried perfectly symmetrical geometric patterns, and produced deep resonant tones comparable to precision-tuned instruments. Yet they emerged from a society traditionally described as a late Bronze Age culture, without writing, advanced machinery, or industrial infrastructure. The deeper researchers studied the Dong Son drums, the more disturbing the technological gap became. The first major discoveries began in the late 19th century during French colonial excavations in northern Vietnam. Local villagers had already been finding buried bronze objects near riverbanks and rice fields for generations, but systematic excavation revealed something unexpected. Enormous ceremonial drums covered in incredibly detailed imagery, cast in single pieces using techniques that even modern foundries consider difficult without precise thermal control. By the early 20th century, hundreds of drums had been identified across Vietnam and throughout Southeast Asia, stretching from southern China to Indonesia. Their existence suggested that a powerful metallurgical tradition had once dominated the region long before recorded local history fully emerged. The greatest mystery surrounding the Dong Son drums is not their artistic beauty. It is the manufacturing technology itself. Some of the finest examples, including the famous Ngoc Lu drum, measure roughly 79 centimeters in diameter and stand more than 60 centimeters tall. The walls remain remarkably thin and consistent, despite the immense size of the object. Modern metallurgists understand how difficult this should have been. Bronze casting on such a scale creates enormous thermal stress. If the molten alloy cools unevenly by even a small margin, cracks form instantly, especially in large hollow objects. Ancient furnaces also lacked modern temperature sensors, controlled airflow systems, and industrial crucibles. Yet many Dongson drums survived intact for over 2 millennia. Researchers studying the alloy composition found that the drums were not made from simple copper. The metal mixture often included carefully balanced percentages of tin and lead, sometimes varying slightly between sections of the drum. These variations appear intentional rather than accidental. Higher tin concentrations increase hardness and resonance, but also make bronze more brittle. Lead improves fluidity during casting, allowing molten metal to flow into extremely detailed molds. Too much lead, however, weakens the final structure. Somehow, Dongson metalwork has achieved a balance sophisticated enough to produce objects that were both durable and acoustically resonant. What makes this more difficult to explain is the sheer scale of the casting process. Most Bronze Age societies cast objects in smaller components before joining them together. Large single-piece castings were exceptionally risky because the entire mold could fail during cooling. Yet many Dongson drums appear to have been cast as single units. Experimental archaeologists attempting reconstructions found that reproducing similar drums required enormous quantities of charcoal, highly stable furnace temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius, and precise timing during pouring. Even slight interruptions cause structural defects. Some modern researchers have openly admitted surprise that such consistency could be achieved without advanced mechanical systems. The surface decorations deepen the mystery further. The center of many drums contains a multi-pointed star surrounded by concentric geometric bands. Around these rings appear warriors, birds, boats, dancers, and animals arranged with astonishing radial symmetry. On certain drums, dozens of repeating figures maintain nearly identical spacing across the entire circumference. Creating such precision on a curved mold surface without advanced measuring tools should have been extraordinarily difficult. Several engineers who examined high-resolution scans of Dongson drums noted that some pattern deviations are so small they fall within tolerances comparable to early mechanical drafting techniques. Yet no compasses, rotating calibration devices, or precision marking instruments associated with the culture have ever been found. One theory suggests artisans used rope-based geometric systems combined with rotating carving platforms, essentially primitive mechanical lathes. Another theory proposes generations of specialized craftsmen developed highly refined proportional methods through apprenticeship. Neither explanation fully accounts for the mathematical consistency seen on the finest drums. The acoustic properties of the drums remain another unresolved puzzle. When struck, certain Dongson drums produce low-frequency resonance capable of carrying long distances across open landscapes. Acoustic testing performed on surviving drums showed complex harmonic behavior influenced by wall thickness, internal volume, and the raised star-shaped center. In some cases, the vibration patterns resemble those of tuned bells or ceremonial gongs from far later periods. This has led some researchers to question whether the decorative reliefs were purely symbolic. Raised patterns on modern instruments often affect resonance by redistributing vibrational stress across the surface. Certain Dongson motifs may have unintentionally or deliberately modified sound behavior. If intentional, it would imply an empirical understanding of acoustics developed centuries before formal acoustic science existed. The distribution of the drums across Southeast Asia introduces another technological mystery. Hundreds of Dongson-style drums have been discovered far beyond northern Vietnam, including Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Some were transported across mountainous terrain or vast maritime routes. Considering that larger drums could exceed 100 kilograms, their movement required organized trade systems and logistical coordination far more sophisticated than traditionally assumed for the region during that era. Archaeologists now believe maritime networks across Southeast Asia may have been active centuries earlier and on a larger scale than previously thought. Certain drums found in Indonesia display local modifications while preserving core Dongsun manufacturing principles, suggesting either technological transfer or direct trade contact over enormous distances. This raises a difficult question. Was Dongsun merely a regional culture, or the centre of a much larger metallurgical network that has mostly vanished from history? Another mystery lies in the extraordinary preservation of the drums themselves. Northern Vietnam's tropical climate is extremely hostile to metal. High humidity, acidic soils, and seasonal flooding accelerate corrosion rapidly. Yet many drums retain sharp engraving details after more than 2,000 years underground. Metallurgical analysis suggests stable oxidation layers formed across the surface, protecting the inner bronze from steeper decay. The precise alloy ratios may have unintentionally created corrosion-resistant properties similar to controlled patina formation, seen in some modern engineered bronzes. Even more intriguing is the symbolic language engraved onto the drums. The recurring birds, solar patterns, ritual scenes, and boats appear too structured to be random decoration. Some scholars believe the imagery encoded cosmological beliefs, agricultural cycles, or political authority systems. Others suggest the drums functioned as ceremonial communication devices linking distant communities through shared symbolic language. The star motif at the center remains especially debated. While often interpreted as a sun symbol, its geometric dominance and repeated numerical structure suggest it may have carried more complex meaning tied to astronomy or ritual timing. The technological gap becomes clearer when compared to neighbouring cultures of the same period. Around the time many Dongsun drums were being produced, large parts of Europe were still creating far simpler bronze objects with less precise decorative symmetry. Even some early Chinese bronze traditions relied heavily on sectional mould assembly rather than enormous thin-walled castings. The Dongsun drums therefore do not fit neatly into the expected technological hierarchy of the ancient world. Do you think the Dongsun civilization discovered a level of metallurgical knowledge far ahead of its time, or are we still missing a major piece of the story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Located within the volcanic plains of Cappadocia in central Turkey, archaeologists uncovered a settlement older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, and nearly as old as the first permanent human communities on Earth. Known today as Asikli Hoyuk, this 10,000-year-old settlement contains evidence of urban planning, advanced obsidian engineering, organized architecture, and one of the oldest possible brain surgeries ever discovered. The deeper researchers excavated, the less this place resembled a primitive village, and the more it looked like the beginning of civilization itself. The site was first identified during archaeological surveys in the 1960s around the Melendez River basin, but large-scale excavations officially began in 1989 under Turkish archaeologist Ufuk Esin from Istanbul University. At first, researchers believed Asikli Hoyuk was simply another Neolithic mound buried beneath the Cappadocian soil. Instead, excavation layers revealed more than 400 interconnected mud brick buildings constructed across centuries of rebuilding. Radiocarbon dating pushed the settlement back to approximately 8,207,400 BC, making it one of the oldest known large-scale sedentary communities in Anatolia. Long before urban centres like Çatalhöyük emerged, Asikli Hoyuk was already experimenting with architecture, specialised labour, organised living spaces, and technological systems that should not have existed so early in human history. One of the most baffling mysteries surrounding Asikli Hoyuk is the survival of its mud brick architecture for more than 10,000 years in an environment exposed to severe seasonal temperature shifts. The settlement was built almost entirely from sun-dried mud brick reinforced with straw, ash, and organic material. Under normal conditions, structures like these deteriorate rapidly due to erosion, moisture expansion, and thermal cracking. Yet many walls at Asikli-Hoyuk remained structurally recognizable after millennia underground. Archaeologists discovered that the inhabitants repeatedly rebuilt homes directly on top of previous structures, eventually creating an archaeological mound nearly 16 meters high. What stunned researchers was the consistency of the engineering across generations. Wall thickness, room proportions, and structural alignment remained remarkably stable for centuries, suggesting that builders understood balance, weight distribution, and foundational reinforcement far earlier than expected for Neolithic societies. Microscopic analysis of the bricks revealed carefully controlled mixtures of clay, plant fibers, and ash, with some samples showing signs of moisture regulation before drying. A process comparable in principle to curing techniques used in modern earthen architecture. Compared with many later Neolithic settlements, where construction quality fluctuated wildly between generations, Asikli-Hoyuk maintained extraordinary architectural uniformity. This level of standardization implies organized knowledge transfer and possibly even specialized builders within the community. For a society that had not yet developed metal tools, the precision appears disturbingly advanced. The most shocking discovery at Asikli-Hoyuk came from a human skull excavated during the 1990s. The remains belonged to a young woman estimated to be between 20 and 25 years old. Her skull contained a circular opening with unmistakable evidence of deliberate cutting rather than accidental trauma. Even more astonishing, surrounding bone tissue showed partial healing, strongly suggesting that she survived the procedure for at least several days or possibly weeks afterward. Modern archaeologists classify the operation as a form of trepanation, an ancient cranial surgery involving drilling, scraping, or cutting into the skull. Similar procedures have been discovered in later cultures from ancient Peru to Bronze Age Europe, but the Asikli-Hoyuk example may rank among the earliest ever identified anywhere in the world. The implications are extraordinary. To perform such a procedure, Neolithic people would have required some understanding of human anatomy, knowledge of where to cut without instantly killing the patient, methods of restraining or possibly sedating the individual, sharp enough surgical instruments, and some form of wound treatment afterward. The answer may lie in the thousands of obsidian blades uncovered throughout the settlement. Obsidian fractures at a molecular level sharper than modern surgical steel, and experimental medical studies have shown that obsidian scalpels can create incisions finer than stainless steel blades because their cutting edges can measure only a few nanometers thick. Archaeologists at Asikli-Hoyuk uncovered expertly crafted obsidian tools so symmetrical and refined that some researchers compared them to precision instruments rather than primitive stone tools. This raises an uncomfortable possibility. The inhabitants of Asikli-Hoyuk may have possessed a basic but functional understanding of surgery more than 10,000 years ago. The mystery becomes even darker because the woman's skull also showed evidence of severe infection before the operation. Some experts believe the procedure may have been an attempt to relieve pressure, treat trauma, or stop a dangerous illness. If correct, this was not ritual mutilation, it was medicine. Somehow, in an age before writing, metalworking, or formal science, humans attempted brain surgery with volcanic glass tools. Asikli-Hoyuk stood near the rich obsidian deposits of Cappadocia, one of the largest volcanic glass sources in the ancient world. But archaeologists quickly realized the settlement was not merely using obsidian, It was processing and distributing it on an almost industrial scale. Excavations uncovered enormous quantities of blades, spearheads, cutting tools, unfinished fragments, and workshop debris spread throughout the settlement. Chemical sourcing studies later confirmed that obsidian originating near Asikli Hoyuk travelled hundreds of kilometres across Anatolia and into regions of the Levant, revealing organised trade networks far earlier than historians once believed possible. Some blades were manufactured using advanced pressure flaking techniques requiring extraordinary control, since even the slightest mistake would shatter the material instantly. Experimental archaeologists attempting to recreate these tools often require years of training before producing comparable results. Yet craftsmen at Asikli Hoyuk appear to have mastered the technique routinely. The settlement may have functioned as one of humanity's earliest specialized manufacturing centers, operating thousands of years before the rise of cities, kingdoms, or written economies. Unlike the chaotic layout seen in many prehistoric villages, Asikli Hoyuk followed a surprisingly organized architectural system. Homes were constructed directly against one another, in tightly packed rectangular clusters, with almost no streets separating them. Researchers believe residents moved primarily across rooftops and entered buildings through openings in the ceilings using ladders. The design strongly resembles the later settlement of Catalhoyuk, though Asikli Hoyuk predates it by nearly 1,000 years. Archaeologists suspect this unusual layout served several purposes simultaneously, including thermal insulation during harsh Anatolian winters, reinforcement against structural collapse, defense against external threats, and stronger social cohesion among interconnected family groups. The architecture also minimized exposed outer walls, conserving heat in a manner surprisingly similar to modern energy-efficient housing systems. What remains difficult to explain is how such sophisticated planning emerged so early in human history. There's little evidence of centralized rulers, kings, or monumental political authority at the site, yet the settlement maintained remarkably consistent urban organization across centuries. Asikli Hoyuk functioned less like an accidental village and more like a carefully coordinated system. Another unresolved mystery involves indoor air management. Most homes at Asikli Hoyuk contained hearths and evidence of continuous fire use, yet many rooms displayed unexpectedly low soot accumulation compared to what researchers anticipated. In enclosed mud brick buildings without modern chimneys, smoke inhalation should have been severe. Instead, archaeologists suspect the inhabitants developed primitive ventilation systems using roof openings, controlled airflow channels, or carefully positioned hearths that generated convection currents capable of moving smoke outside. Experimental reconstructions of the building suggest some houses could regulate indoor smoke more efficiently than certain medieval European structures built thousands of years later. If these theories are correct, Asikli Hoyuk demonstrates an extremely early understanding of passive ventilation engineering long before formal architectural science existed. Do you think places like Asikli Hoyuk prove that ancient civilization developed far faster than modern history tells us? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. The Altai Mountains of eastern Kazakhstan, close to the borders of Russia, Mongolia, and China, hide one of the strangest burial sites ever discovered: Beryl burial mounds. Inside these stone-covered tombs, archaeologists found horses with intact skin and hair, wooden saddles that never rotted away, and organic materials preserved for more than 2,000 years beneath solid ice. What should have turned to dust survived almost perfectly, and the deeper researchers studied Beryl, the more impossible the site began to look. The Beryl kurgans were first documented during Russian expeditions in the 19th century, but the most important excavations began in 1998 under Kazakh archaeologist Zainola Samashev. Beneath massive stone mounds scattered across the Beryl Valley, researchers uncovered elite tombs belonging to the Scythian Saka nomads of the 4th to 3rd century BCE. One burial chamber immediately shocked scientists. Inside were 13 horses laid side by side with elaborate ceremonial decorations still attached to their bodies. Their leather harnesses, wooden ornaments, felt coverings, and even patches of fur had survived because the tomb had frozen solid shortly after burial. Permafrost preservation is known in Siberia, but Beryl was different. The tombs appeared engineered to create and maintain freezing conditions deliberately. That possibility transformed the site from a remarkable archaeological discovery into a technological mystery. Among all the mysteries of Beryl, none is more controversial than the preservation of organic materials. Under normal conditions, leather, fur, wood, and textiles decay rapidly because of bacteria, moisture, fungi, and oxygen exposure. In temperate climates, untreated leather can begin breaking down within decades. Yet at Beryl, materials older than 23 centuries remained astonishingly intact. The immediate explanation was ice, but laboratory analysis showed preservation quality that exceeded what freezing alone should achieve. Some horse remains retained structural collagen stability far beyond expectations. Wooden components preserved microscopic carving details that normally disappear even in permanently frozen environments. Researchers discovered traces of resins, oils, and organic coatings on some artifacts. Chemical studies suggested mixtures derived from tree sap, animal fat, and plant compounds may have been intentionally applied before burial. Several compounds displayed antimicrobial properties comparable to primitive preservation treatments. The exact formulation, however, remains unknown. This has led to one of the most debated theories surrounding Beryl. The Saka elites may have possessed an advanced empirical understanding of organic preservation centuries before formal chemistry existed. Comparisons with other frozen burials make the anomaly even stranger. The famous Pazyryk burials in Siberia, located roughly 500 kilometers away and culturally related to Beryl, also preserved organic materials through ice formation. However, some Beryl artifacts demonstrated lower bacterial degradation rates despite similar environmental conditions. That difference suggests additional preservation methods may have been involved. Modern conservation laboratories still struggle to recreate the same level of long-term stability in untreated natural materials. Museums storing ancient leather often require controlled humidity between 45 and 55%, temperatures below 20 degrees Celsius, and continuous chemical stabilization. Beryl achieved preservation lasting more than 2,000 years without modern technology. Some scientists believe the tomb builders intentionally manipulated airflow, moisture penetration, and thermal insulation using layers of stone, timber, and packed earth. Others argue the preservation was accidental, but enhanced by unknown organic treatments. Either explanation implies a far more sophisticated understanding of environmental control than historians normally associate with nomadic cultures. The mystery becomes even deeper when considering the horses themselves. Their bodies were not simply buried. They appear carefully prepared before interment, with evidence suggesting ritual cleaning and possible treatment of the skin and harnesses. Some scholars compare the process to early forms of mummification, though entirely different from Egyptian techniques. Unlike Egypt, where natron salts dehydrated the dead, Beryl preservation relied on freezing and environmental isolation. Two civilizations separated by thousands of kilometers may have independently developed completely different methods for defeating decay. The burial mounds themselves represent a major engineering puzzle. Some Beryl kurgans exceed 30 meters in diameter and contain thousands of tons of stone transported into mountainous terrain without wheeled transport or advanced machinery. The tomb chambers were built from massive larch logs arranged with geometric precision. Above them, layers of stone created thermal insulation while also trapping moisture that later froze. Researchers believe meltwater seeped downward during seasonal temperature changes, then became trapped beneath the stone layers where winter temperatures froze it permanently. What fascinates engineers today is how stable the internal environment remained. Freeze-thaw cycles normally destroy underground structures over centuries. Expanding ice fractures stone, collapses cavities, and rots timber. Yet Beryl's chambers survived with remarkable structural integrity. Some modern geotechnical specialists have compared the design principles to passive thermal regulation systems used in Arctic engineering today. By carefully controlling density, airflow, and insulation layers, the builders may have unintentionally, or intentionally, created stable cryogenic chambers. If deliberate, this would mean Iron Age's nomads understood long-term environmental engineering at a level never previously attributed to them. The horses of Beryl remain among the most visually haunting discoveries in archaeology. Each animal was buried wearing ceremonial masks, decorated with gold leaf, carved wood, and symbolic animal forms combining deer, mountain goats, birds of prey, and mythological hybrids. The craftsmanship is astonishingly precise. Some gold foils are less than 1 mm thick yet contain highly detailed engravings. Producing such decorations required advanced metalworking control and specialized artisan skill. Even more mysterious is the arrangement of the horses. They were positioned with extraordinary uniformity, all facing the same direction inside carefully organized burial rows. This suggests strict ceremonial protocols, possibly linked to cosmology or elite military symbolism. So DNA studies indicate many of the horses were selectively bred. Their skeletal structures reveal animals optimized for endurance and mountain mobility rather than brute strength. This implies controlled breeding programs among Saka elites over centuries. The burial of 13 horses alongside a single elite individual also represented immense economic sacrifice. In nomadic societies, horses were survival assets. Killing so many valuable animals for one funeral demonstrates extraordinary social hierarchy and ritual importance. Artifacts found at Beryl reveal connections stretching across Eurasia. Chinese silk fragments, Persian-influenced decorative techniques, and steppe animal-style art appeared together within the same tombs. This suggests the Altai region participated in long-distance exchange systems centuries before the Silk Road formally emerged during the Han Dynasty around the 2nd century BCE. The scale of this interaction raises difficult questions. How did isolated mountain nomads maintain communication and trade across thousands of kilometers? How were fragile luxury materials transported through extreme terrain? And how did artistic styles spread so rapidly across ancient Eurasia without centralized empires controlling the routes? Some historians now view the Eurasian steppe not as an empty barrier between civilizations, but as a highly active technological corridor connecting distant cultures long before classical trade networks were officially recorded. Do you think the people of Beryl possessed knowledge far beyond what history officially recognizes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Southern Syria. Near the volcanic plains of the Hauran region, Bosra rises from the desert like a fossilized machine built from black lava stone. For nearly 2,000 years, earthquakes, invasions, and climate collapse failed to erase it. Even today, its giant Roman theatre, roads, tunnels, and hydraulic systems remain standing with a level of precision that many researchers struggle to fully explain. Although Bosra had been known for centuries through Roman and Islamic records, its true scale was not fully understood until systematic archaeological surveys during the 19th and 20th centuries. European explorers arriving in the Ottoman period realized that what appeared to be a medieval fortress actually concealed one of the best preserved Roman theatres on Earth. excavations later revealed multiple historical layers buried beneath basalt debris. Nabatean structures, Roman engineering, Byzantine churches, Islamic fortifications, underground reservoirs, and entire transportation systems integrated into volcanic terrain. Archaeologists quickly realized Bosra was not simply another Roman provincial city. It was an engineering anomaly built in one of the harshest environments in the Middle East. Among Bosra's greatest unsolved engineering mysteries are its roads. Unlike cities built mainly from limestone or sandstone, Bosra relied heavily on basalt, an extremely dense volcanic rock measuring roughly 6 on the Mohs hardness scale. Basalt is notoriously difficult to cut, shape and transport even with later medieval technology. Yet the ancient engineers of Bosra paved entire transportation networks with it. Some Roman roads around Bosra still preserve visible wheel ruts after nearly 2 millennia. The stone slabs remain surprisingly level despite extreme seasonal temperature shifts that can exceed 40 degrees Celsius between summer days and winter nights. Modern civil engineers note that repeated thermal expansion should have fractured many sections long ago. Instead, many roads remain structurally stable. What makes the mystery deeper is the apparent anti-desertification strategy integrated into the road system itself. Bosra sat near semi-arid trade routes linking Damascus with Arabia. Dust storms, heat reflection, and erosion should have buried the roads over centuries. Yet evidence suggests the engineers designed surfaces specifically to resist desert conditions. Researchers discovered slight convex curvature along some basalt road segments. This subtle shape allowed rare rainwater to drain rapidly away from the center instead of pooling into cracks. Similar hydraulic shaping exists in modern highways, but Bosra's version appeared nearly 2,000 years earlier. More mysterious are traces of unusual surface coatings detected on certain stone fragments. Some archaeologists suspect the roads may once have been treated with organic compounds, oils, lime mixtures, or mineral-based sealants to reduce dust accumulation and heat absorption. No complete chemical formula has been reconstructed. If true, Bosra may represent one of history's earliest large-scale attempts at environmental road engineering. Comparisons with Roman roads in Pompeii or Jerash show Bosra's roads were unusually adapted for volcanic terrain and desert climates simultaneously. Unlike the limestone systems of the Mediterranean, basalt absorbs and radiates heat differently. Managing thermal stress in such material would have required precise understanding of expansion, drainage, and weight distribution. Some historians believe Bosra's survival as a trade center depended less on military strength and more on this hidden infrastructure technology. Without durable roads capable of resisting desert erosion, caravans carrying incense, silk, grain, and spices could never have crossed the region efficiently for centuries. Even today, no one fully understands how ancient workers consistently shaped and aligned massive basalt paving blocks with such precision using pre-industrial tools. Bosra's Roman theatre remains one of the best preserved theatres ever discovered from the ancient world. Constructed largely during the 2nd century CE, it could hold approximately 15,000 spectators. But its greatest mystery is not its size, it is its acoustics. Even now, voices spoken near the stage can often be heard clearly from the upper seating sections without electronic amplification. Acoustic engineers studying the structure observed that the semicircular geometry, wall height, stair distribution, and stone density all contribute to unusually efficient sound reflection. Unlike theatres in Ephesus or Aspendos, Bosra used dark basalt rather than softer limestone. Basalt reflects sound differently because of its density and surface texture. Achieving balanced acoustics with such material would have required remarkable experimentation or inherited engineering knowledge. The theatre also survived multiple major earthquakes that devastated surrounding regions. Syria lies near tectonic fault systems that produced destructive quakes throughout history, including events in 749 CE and 1157 CE. Yet, Bosra's theatre largely endured. Some structural historians argue the curved load distribution and interconnected vault system acted similarly to modern seismic stress redistribution techniques. What appears decorative may actually have been structural engineering far ahead of its time. Centuries after the Roman era, Bosra's giant theatre underwent a radical transformation. Islamic Ayyubid engineers converted the entertainment structure into a massive fortress surrounded by towers, battlements, gates, and defensive corridors. Normally, theatres are vulnerable during warfare. Their open designs create weak defensive zones. Yet Bosra became one of the strongest fortified positions in the region. Military historians remain puzzled by how efficiently the conversion worked. The concentric passageways beneath the seating areas created layered defensive movement systems, resembling concepts found in much later medieval castles. Attackers entering outer corridors could become trapped inside narrow choke points, while defenders maneuvered through hidden internal routes. The structure effectively evolved into a hybrid of Roman civic architecture and Islamic military engineering. Even more remarkable is the fact that the fortress additions integrated almost seamlessly into the original Roman framework without collapsing the older structure. This required advanced understanding of weight transfer across ancient masonry already centuries old. Bosra existed in a region where water scarcity constantly threatened urban survival. Yet historical estimates suggest the city once supported tens of thousands of inhabitants, along with large merchant caravans moving across southern Syria. Excavations uncovered underground cisterns, hidden reservoirs, drainage channels, and rainwater harvesting systems carved directly into volcanic bedrock. This is extremely difficult because basalt fractures unpredictably under pressure. Many reservoirs were coated with waterproof hydraulic mortar, similar to Roman pozzolanic concrete. However, Bosra's formulas appear locally adapted. Scientists analyzing surviving samples found mineral compositions that differ from standard Mediterranean Roman mixtures. Some researchers suspect local engineers combined Roman techniques with Nabatean desert water knowledge inherited from Arabian trade cultures. If true, Bosra may represent a technological fusion zone between multiple civilizations. The hydraulic efficiency was extraordinary for an ancient desert-edge city. Even slight rainfall could be redirected into storage systems capable of sustaining urban populations through dry seasons. Without this infrastructure, Bosra could never have survived. Below Bosra lies a labyrinth of tunnels and underground chambers that remains only partially explored. Some passages connect storage areas, military positions, and water systems. Others simply disappear into collapsed sections beneath later structures. The cutting precision inside several tunnels continues to raise questions. Straight walls, sharp angles, and smooth basalt surfaces are difficult to achieve using iron chisels alone, because basalt rapidly destroys tool edges. Some engineers speculate ancient builders may have used controlled thermal fracturing, heating basalt intensely before cooling it rapidly with water to create predictable cracks. Variations of this technique were known in ancient mining operations, but Bosra may have employed it on a far larger architectural scale. No definitive evidence has proven the exact method. Do you think Bosra's lost engineering techniques were simply forgotten over time? Or does this city prove that some ancient civilizations understood materials, climate, and construction far better than we realize today? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Northern Yucatan, Mexico. Beneath a landscape with almost no rivers, the ancient Maya built a city that may have survived for over 1,000 years by engineering an invisible water system beneath solid limestone. At the center of it stood Zibil Chaltun, a city whose roads ran in unnatural straight lines, whose buildings aligned with the sun to near-perfect precision, and whose survival still raises questions modern archaeology cannot fully answer. Unlike lost jungle cities swallowed completely by rainforest, Zibil Chaltun was never entirely forgotten by local communities. Formal archaeological investigation began in the 1940s, but the major excavations were carried out during the 1950s and 1960s by the Carnegie Institution and Mexican archaeologist E. Willis Andrews IV. What researchers uncovered was shocking. A massive Maya urban center covering nearly 20 square kilometers, potentially housing more than 20,000 people at its peak between 600 and 900 AD. That immediately created a paradox. Northern Yucatan possesses almost no permanent surface rivers. Annual rainfall averages roughly 700 to 1,000 millimeters, but the porous limestone ground absorbs water rapidly. Large populations should not have been sustainable here for centuries. Yet Zibil Chaltun flourished. The most famous structure at Zibil Chaltun is the Temple of the Seven Dolls, a relatively small building compared to the pyramids of Chichen Itza or Tikal. But its mystery may be even greater. Twice each year during the spring and autumn equinoxes, the rising sun passes directly through the temple's aligned eastern and western openings with astonishing accuracy. Thousands still gather there to watch the event today. The phenomenon is so precise that even small structural deviations would have destroyed the alignment centuries ago. What makes this difficult to explain is not merely that the Maya track the sun. Many ancient civilizations observed celestial cycles. The real mystery is the engineering precision achieved without metal surveying equipment, telescopic optics, magnetic compasses, or modern geometry tools. Researchers studying Mesoamerican astronomy have noted that the sun's position at sunrise changes gradually throughout the year. To create an alignment that works repeatedly over centuries, builders needed to determine the exact east-west solar axis with extremely low angular error. A deviation of only 1 or 2 degrees could ruin the effect entirely. The Maya also faced another challenge rarely discussed: horizon distortion. The apparent rising position of the sun changes depending on atmospheric refraction, terrain elevation, and seasonal visibility conditions. Modern archaeoastronomers often use computerized calculations to reconstruct ancient alignments. Yet the Maya achieved this using observational methods alone. Some archaeologists argue the structure functioned as a ceremonial solar calendar tied to agricultural cycles. Others believe it was part of a much larger astronomical network spread across the Yucatan Peninsula. Similar solar alignments appear at Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and Mayapan, but the alignment at Zibil Chaltun remains unusually minimalistic and mathematically direct. Inside the temple, archaeologists discovered 7 unusual clay figurines with exaggerated features, giving the structure its modern name. Their purpose remains unknown. No definitive Maya text explains who they represented or why exactly 7 figures were hidden there. Some theories connect them to cosmology or ritual astronomy, but there is still no consensus. The deeper mystery is psychological as much as technical. The structure demonstrates that the Maya were not merely watching the sky casually, they were embedding astronomical calculations directly into architecture with repeatable long-term precision. In practical terms, the building itself functioned almost like a stone instrument. Zibil Chaltun existed because of water, specifically because of a massive natural sinkhole called Slaka Cenote. Unlike civilizations built beside visible rivers like the Nile or Euphrates, the Maya of northern Yucatan depended on hidden groundwater trapped beneath limestone bedrock. Cenotes formed when underground caves collapsed, exposing freshwater reservoirs connected to vast subterranean systems. The Slaka Cenote at Zibil Chaltun measures roughly 40 meters wide and more than 40 meters deep in some sections. Archaeologists discovered offerings, ceramics, jade objects, tools, and human remains inside, suggesting it was both a water source and sacred site. But the real puzzle lies in how the city was planned around it. Satellite mapping and excavation data show that many residential and ceremonial sectors were positioned to optimize access to groundwater and seasonal runoff. The Maya appear to have understood the hydrological behavior of porous limestone terrain with surprising sophistication. Modern hydrologists studying karst systems use geological modeling, groundwater mapping, and remote sensing technologies. Yet the Maya identified sustainable settlement zones over 1,000 years ago with no known advanced instruments. Even more impressive is the city's long-term survival. Population estimates suggest Zibil-Chaltun may have supported tens of thousands of inhabitants for centuries. That required consistent freshwater access despite periodic droughts that devastated other Maya cities. Some climate studies indicate that parts of the Maya collapse around the 9th century coincided with prolonged megadroughts lasting decades. Sediment cores from Yucatan Lake suggest rainfall reductions of up to 40% during severe episodes. The mystery is why Zibil-Chaltun survived longer than many inland centers, despite existing in one of the most water-sensitive regions of Mesoamerica. Zibil-Chaltun was connected by raised white stone roads called Sakbeob. Some extended for kilometers with remarkably consistent orientation. From the air, certain routes appear unnaturally linear, almost as if they were planned using modern surveying techniques. Maintaining straight alignments through dense tropical terrain is difficult even today without optical references. The Maya had no pack animals capable of heavy transport and no practical wheeled freight system. Every stone block, construction material, and trade good had to be carried manually. Yet the city expanded into a vast urban network linked with regional trade routes stretching toward the Gulf Coast. Obsidian from highland Guatemala, marine shells, jade, and imported ceramics have all been discovered there. This suggests logistical organization on a scale far beyond the stereotypical image of isolated jungle settlements. Another unresolved mystery is the durability of Maya construction materials. Most structures at Zibil-Chaltun were built using limestone masonry coated with lime plaster. Producing lime requires heating limestone to temperatures exceeding roughly 800 to 900 degrees Celsius, a process demanding enormous quantities of fuel. For a city this size, the amount of wood required would have been staggering. Yet many structures still retain bonded masonry after more than a millennium of humidity, storms, heat, biological growth, and erosion. Some material scientists studying Maya mortar have identified traces of organic additives that may have improved strength and water resistance. In certain tests, ancient lime plasters displayed microstructural resilience, unexpectedly competitive with some later historic mortars. The engineering contradiction is difficult to ignore. A civilization supposedly limited technologically managed large-scale thermal material production, long-distance logistics, astronomical calibration, and sustainable urban planning simultaneously. What do you think really caused the fall of Zibil-Chaltun? Was it drought, collapsing trade networks, internal conflict? Or is there still something about this ancient city we have completely failed to understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Ararat Plain of modern Armenia, surrounded by volcanic mountains and ancient trade routes, holds the ruins of Armavir on land that should never have supported a long-lasting imperial capital. Yet more than 2,700 years ago, the kingdom of Urartu transformed this unstable plateau into one of the most technologically advanced strongholds of the Iron Age. What archaeologists discovered there was not just another ruined city. Beneath the dust were signs of seismic engineering, precision-cut volcanic stone, hydraulic systems carved through basalt, and evidence of a military-industrial network so advanced that some historians compare Urartu to an Iron Age machine state. Even stranger, much of that knowledge disappeared almost completely after the collapse of the kingdom. Armavir's ruins became a major archaeological focus during excavations in the 19th and 20th centuries after researchers identified Urartian inscriptions, fortress foundations, irrigation systems, and evidence of large-scale metallurgy buried beneath layers of volcanic soil. The discoveries revealed that Armavir was not an isolated settlement, but part of a massive state-controlled engineering network stretching across the Armenian highlands. The Armenian highlands sit within one of the most seismically active zones in Eurasia. Modern earthquakes in the region have exceeded magnitudes of 6 and 7, capable of levelling stone cities in minutes. Yet portions of Armavir's structural foundations survived for nearly 3 millennia. Excavations revealed unusual layered construction beneath major buildings. Instead of placing stone directly onto bedrock, Urartian builders often used compacted volcanic gravel, clay mixtures, and porous sublayers capable of dispersing stress waves. Some researchers compare the concept to primitive seismic dampening systems. What makes this mysterious is the timeline. Similar anti-seismic approaches became famous in Roman and Byzantine engineering centuries later. In Peru, the Inca used polygonal masonry to absorb tremors, while in Japan ancient pagodas relied on flexible central columns. But Armavir appears to demonstrate an earlier understanding of structural survival in earthquake zones. Several surviving wall bases also show slight inward tilts, suggesting builders intentionally distributed vertical load toward the center of structures. This reduced outward collapse during tremors, a principle still used in earthquake-resistant architecture today. The question remains, how did an Iron Age civilization develop this level of geological understanding without modern mathematics or structural science? One of the greatest mysteries of Armavir is water. The region surrounding the city experiences harsh seasonal shifts, with hot, dry summers and limited rainfall. Yet archaeological surveys uncovered canals, underground channels, and reservoir systems capable of sustaining agriculture and urban populations on a massive scale. Some channels were carved directly into basalt, one of the hardest volcanic rocks on Earth. Even more astonishing, many maintained extremely consistent gradients over long distances. In certain excavated sections, deviations in slope were measured in mere millimeters across several meters. That level of precision is difficult even with modern surveying tools. Hydraulic engineers studying Urartian irrigation systems have compared them to Persian qanats and later Roman aqueducts. However, many Urartian systems predate Rome's largest aqueduct projects by centuries. Researchers estimate that the broader Urartian canal network may have irrigated tens of thousands of hectares of farmland. This transformed otherwise difficult terrain into productive agricultural territory, capable of supporting armies, industry, and urban expansion. Some historians believe Urartu's survival depended less on military strength and more on hydraulic engineering. Control the water, and they controlled the kingdom. Yet no one fully understands how they map terrain with such precision across mountainous volcanic landscapes. The stone blocks of Armavir continue to puzzle archaeologists because of the materials involved. The city's builders worked extensively with basalt and andesite, volcanic stones with hardness levels far above ordinary limestone or sandstone. Cutting these materials with primitive bronze tools would have been nearly impossible. Yet many blocks display remarkably flat surfaces, tight joints, and near-perfect angular cuts. Microscopic analysis of some tool marks suggests the use of iron implements combined with abrasive cutting materials such as quartz sand or crushed obsidian. If true, Urartian craftsmen may have developed advanced abrasive machining techniques centuries ahead of neighboring civilizations. Some joints between blocks are so narrow that inserting even a thin blade becomes difficult. Comparable precision is often associated with Inca masonry at sites like Sacsayhuaman or with certain Egyptian granite structures. But unlike Egypt, where massive labour forces and centralised dynasties are well documented, far less is known about the technical workforce behind Urartu. Even more mysterious is the speed at which these fortresses appeared across the kingdom. Within roughly 2 centuries, Urartu constructed an enormous network of fortified cities, towers, canals, and storage complexes throughout rugged mountain terrain. That level of expansion required logistics, planning, and engineering coordination on an industrial scale. Stone inscriptions found near Armavir reveal a civilization obsessed with organization. The inscriptions describe taxation systems, grain storage, military inventories, tribute collection, canal construction, and territorial administration. Unlike many neighboring kingdoms whose records were inconsistent, Eurasian inscriptions followed highly standardized formatting. Characters were carved with unusual uniformity in spacing and depth, suggesting the use of measurement guides or drafting systems. Some archaeologists believe specialized state scribes and engineers work together in centralized administrative centers. Others suggest Urartu may have maintained technical archives containing construction methods, resource calculations, and military production data. Large storage facilities discovered near Urartian settlements support this theory. Certain granaries were capable of storing thousands of tons of grain, enough to support standing armies through long winters and extended campaigns. Compared with the fragmented political systems of many surrounding regions, Urartu operated more like a centralized engineering state. But one major mystery remains unresolved. The primary archives of Armavir itself have never been fully discovered. If they still exist somewhere beneath the volcanic layers, they could radically change modern understanding of Iron Age technology. More than any other mystery surrounding Armavir, the metallurgy of Urartu may be the most frighteningly advanced. Urartu emerged during the early Iron Age, a period when control of metal meant control of civilization itself. Weapons, armor, farming tools, chariots, fortresses, and trade all depended on metallurgical superiority, and evidence suggests Urartu mastered it. Archaeologists uncovered remains of smelting furnaces, slag deposits, weapon fragments, and mining infrastructure linked to large-scale metal production. Chemical analysis of surviving artifacts revealed unusually consistent alloy compositions, especially in iron and bronze military equipment. This consistency matters. In ancient metallurgy, maintaining stable carbon levels and controlled temperatures was extremely difficult. Even slight fluctuations could weaken blades or make armor brittle. Yet many Urartian weapons show hardness levels far beyond what historians once expected from the 8th century BCE. Some spearheads and blades appear to have undergone repeated heating and hammering cycles similar to primitive heat treatment techniques. Metallurgists comparing the artifacts to Assyrian weapons found that Urartian military equipment may have possessed superior durability in combat. The kingdom's geography gave it access to enormous mineral wealth, iron, copper, and possibly tin roots crossing the Armenian highlands. But raw resources alone cannot explain the scale of production. What truly shocks researchers is the industrial organization behind it. Urartu built fortress chains across mountains, connected through roads, signal towers, storage depots, and hydraulic systems. Some historians believe these fortresses function like integrated military production centers rather than isolated defensive castles. Weapons could be manufactured, stored, transported, and redistributed rapidly across the kingdom. This resembles something far closer to a coordinated state military industry than most civilizations of the same era. Several furnace structures discovered across Urartian territory also reveal sophisticated airflow engineering. Their angled ventilation systems increased combustion efficiency while reducing fuel consumption, similar in principle to later draft furnace technologies. In regions where timber resources were limited, fuel efficiency would have been critical. Some researchers now argue that Urartu's real power did not come from kings or armies alone, but from engineers, miners, metallurgists, and logistics planners operating behind the scenes. Do you think Urartu's lost metallurgy was simply forgotten over time? Or could an entire advanced engineering system have vanished with the collapse of the kingdom? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Aegean coastline near modern-day Sesme hides the ruins of an ancient Bronze Age settlement now known as Sesme Bagla Arasi, a place suddenly erased by a catastrophe so violent that entire buildings collapsed beneath walls of seawater, volcanic ash, and marine debris. Yet the deeper archaeologists excavated, the more disturbing the site became. Beneath the destruction layers were signs that these people may have understood the sea, engineering, and long-distance navigation far better than history officially allows. The site was systematically excavated beginning in the early 2000s by Turkish archaeologists led by Vasif Sahoglu from Ankara University. What initially appeared to be a normal Bronze Age coastal settlement quickly turned into one of the strongest tsunami destruction sites ever identified in the Eastern Mediterranean. Thick marine sediment layers, crushed seashells, volcanic material, and collapsed architecture revealed evidence of repeated massive sea surges, likely connected to the eruption of Thera, modern Santorini, around the 17th or 16th century BC. But the greatest mystery was not the tsunami itself. It was how advanced this settlement appeared before it was destroyed. The eruption of Thera is considered one of the largest volcanic disasters in human history. Some volcanologists estimate the explosion released energy equivalent to several hundred atomic bombs. The eruption column may have reached over 30 kilometers into the atmosphere, while parts of the volcanic island collapsed into the sea, generating enormous tsunamis across the Aegean. Sesme Bagla Arasi sits hundreds of kilometers from Santorini, yet the destruction layer suggests waves powerful enough to rip through stone structures and drag marine material deep inland. Geological analysis found broken marine shells, underwater microorganisms, volcanic ash particles, rounded coastal stones transported inland, and chaotic debris deposits consistent with tsunami backwash. What shocked researchers was that the settlement may have been hit multiple times. Sediment studies suggest not one wave, but a sequence of destructive surges arriving over time. Some tsunami models estimate wave heights. Along parts of the Anatolian coast may have exceeded 10 meters, while other reconstructions suggest localized amplification could have produced even larger impacts depending on coastal geometry. Compared to ordinary storm flooding, the force required to create these deposits was extreme. In modern comparisons, scientists have likened the energy distribution to parts of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, though on a smaller regional scale. Yet some structures at Sesme did not completely collapse, and that is where the mystery truly begins. The most unsettling aspect of Sesme Bagla Arasi is the evidence that its inhabitants were deeply connected to a massive maritime network operating across the Bronze Age Aegean, long before advanced navigation instruments officially existed. Archaeologists uncovered imported ceramics and trade materials linked to Minoan Crete, the Cycladic Islands, Western Anatolia, and mainland Greece. This alone is not unusual for the Late Bronze Age. What is unusual is the scale and consistency of interaction implied by the material record. To maintain these routes, Bronze Age sailors would have needed to repeatedly cross dangerous open waters filled with unpredictable currents, violent storms, sharp island formations, and seasonal wind shifts. The Aegean Sea is notoriously difficult to navigate even with modern equipment. During the summer, the Meltemi winds can exceed 50 kilometers per hour and generate dangerous wave systems capable of destroying small vessels. Yet these ancient sailors maintained stable trade systems for centuries. No magnetic compass existed. No accurate longitude system existed. No surviving maps from the period explain their navigation methods, and almost all wooden ships from the era have long decayed away. Some researchers believe Bronze Age navigators may have relied on highly sophisticated environmental observation systems involving stellar positioning, seasonal wind cycles, bird migration behavior, cloud formations, current patterns, and wave reflection analysis near islands. Experimental archaeologists have demonstrated that primitive vessels can cross large distances using only celestial navigation and environmental memory. However, maintaining an entire interconnected maritime economy across hundreds of kilometers would require astonishing precision and accumulated knowledge. Even more mysterious is the possibility that these societies understood the sea as a long-term environmental threat. Several architectural remains at Sesme show signs of unusual structural planning. Unlike rigid fortress systems seen in parts of Mycenaean Greece, some walls here appear layered with smaller stones and flexible, fill material capable of absorbing lateral force. Certain gaps between structural components may have helped dissipate hydraulic pressure during flooding events. Modern engineers sometimes compare similar concepts to flexible seismic foundations or pressure release systems designed for earthquakes and water impacts. There is no proof Bronze Age builders understood hydrodynamics scientifically, but the survival patterns of certain structures raise uncomfortable questions. Were these people adapting to repeated coastal disasters over generations? If so, this would mean Bronze Age civilizations along the Aegean were not primitive coastal villages blindly vulnerable to nature. They may have been experienced maritime societies developing practical engineering knowledge through centuries of survival. And if they truly possessed that level of accumulated oceanic knowledge, then much of their technology vanished completely after the collapse of the Bronze Age world around 1200 BC. One of the most puzzling discoveries at Çeşme Baglararası is the surprisingly small number of bodies found relative to the scale of destruction. Entire sections of the settlement were devastated, yet archaeologists did not uncover mass casualty evidence comparable to sites like Pompeii. This has produced a controversial theory. Some researchers believe the inhabitants may have recognized warning signs before the tsunami arrived. Modern tsunami science shows that massive waves are often preceded by sudden sea withdrawal, unusual animal behavior, or seismic activity. If Bronze Age coastal communities experienced repeated maritime disasters over centuries, they may have developed oral survival traditions capable of triggering evacuation responses. In other words, they may have known what was coming. That possibility transforms the disaster from a random catastrophe into evidence of inherited environmental intelligence. Çeşme Baglararası is also important because it sits directly inside one of archaeology's greatest dating controversies. The eruption of Thera has two competing timelines. Around 1628 BC based on radiocarbon dating and tree ring anomalies, and around 1500 BC based on traditional Egyptian chronology. That discrepancy of more than a century affects the entire synchronization of Bronze Age Mediterranean history. If the earlier date is correct, major timelines involving Minoan civilization, Mycenaean Greece, and New Kingdom Egypt may need partial revision. Volcanic ash layers found at Çeşme are therefore incredibly valuable because they provide another reference point for reconstructing the chronology of one of history's most important disasters. Very few archaeological sites preserve this level of direct environmental evidence. Another remarkable aspect of the site is the preservation quality. The tsunami buried parts of the settlement beneath oxygen-poor marine sediment mixed with volcanic material. This created conditions similar to a sealed capsule, allowing organic traces that normally decay rapidly to survive far longer than expected. Researchers recovered carbonized wood fragments, seeds, plant remains, burned materials, household debris, floor surfaces, and structural impressions. Some archaeologists informally compare the preservation environment to a submerged version of Pompeii, though formed through water and sediment instead of volcanic ash alone. These preserved layers allow scientists to reconstruct not only destruction patterns, but also daily life before the catastrophe. And the reconstruction suggests something unsettling. This settlement was not isolated. It belonged to a sophisticated maritime world that was suddenly shattered. Do you think the Bronze Age civilizations of the Aegean were far more advanced than history officially tells us? And could entire systems of ancient maritime knowledge have been lost forever after the collapse of that world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The rugged hills of Seriphos ancient mines in the Aegean Sea conceal the remains of mining and metallurgical systems that appear centuries ahead of their time. Deep tunnels cut through extremely hard rock, massive slag fields showing signs of unusually high smelting temperatures, and strangely efficient ventilation systems have led some researchers to question whether ancient miners on this isolated Greek island possessed a level of practical engineering knowledge far beyond what history normally attributes to the Bronze and early Iron Age Mediterranean. The mines were known in antiquity, but systematic archaeological study only accelerated during the 19th and 20th centuries when industrial mining operations on Seriphos reopened old shafts and uncovered layers of ancient workings buried beneath later excavations. Archaeologists soon realized that some tunnels dated back more than 2,000 years before modern mining returned to the island. Pottery fragments, charcoal remains, and slag deposits suggested continuous exploitation from at least the early Bronze Age through the Classical and Roman periods. Yet the deeper researchers explored, the more difficult it became to explain how such complex mining systems were created with supposedly primitive technology. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Seriphos is the geometry of its underground tunnels. Many passages maintain remarkably consistent dimensions across long distances, despite being carved directly into metamorphic rock formations. In several areas, tunnel inclinations remain surprisingly uniform, something difficult to achieve even with modern surveying tools inside confined underground environments. Ancient miners theoretically relied on oil lamps, hammerstones, bronze chisels, and later iron picks. But some shafts descend at angles so controlled that modern mining historians have compared them to organized Roman-era engineering projects developed centuries later. Even more puzzling is the apparent understanding of structural stress inside the mines. Certain pillars were intentionally left standing to support ceilings, and many of these support columns are positioned almost exactly where modern geological analysis would recommend. Seriphos sits within a tectonically active region of the Aegean basin, where earthquakes have repeatedly shaken the islands for thousands of years. Yet numerous ancient chambers survived remarkably intact. Some tunnels remained stable for over 2 millennia before modern collapses occurred after industrial interference. This suggests the miners possessed a highly advanced practical understanding of rock behavior, fracture lines, and load distribution, despite having no known mathematical models of structural engineering. But the most controversial mystery involves the metallurgical evidence discovered around the island's ancient smelting zones. Large slag heaps scattered across Seriphos contain mineral structures indicating extremely high smelting temperatures. Laboratory analysis of certain iron-rich slag samples revealed partial vitrification and crystal formations associated with temperatures exceeding approximately 1200 degrees Celsius. For comparison, traditional open charcoal furnaces from many early Mediterranean cultures typically struggled to sustain temperatures much beyond 1,000 to 1,100 degrees Celsius consistently. Reaching beyond 1,200 degrees required extremely efficient oxygen flow and highly controlled combustion conditions. This becomes difficult to explain because Seriphos itself is relatively barren. Unlike heavily forested mainland regions, the island lacked the vast timber reserves normally required to fuel large-scale high-temperature metallurgy over centuries. Ancient smelting on such a scale should theoretically have consumed enormous quantities of charcoal. Researchers have estimated that producing a single kilogram of workable iron in early antiquity could require several kilograms of charcoal depending on furnace efficiency. Yet the archaeological evidence suggests sustained production over very long periods. Some researchers believe the miners and metallurgists of Seriphos may have exploited the island's intense seasonal winds to create naturally pressurized furnace systems. Certain furnace remains appear strategically positioned along slopes exposed to strong Aegean airflow. Experimental archaeologists have proposed that carefully angled furnace mouths could have generated a primitive natural blast effect, dramatically increasing combustion temperatures without mechanical bellows. If true, this would represent a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of aerodynamics and thermal engineering for the ancient world. The theory becomes even more intriguing when compared to later blast furnace principles developed much farther north in medieval Europe. Medieval blast furnaces relied on sustained oxygen injection to reach temperatures high enough for large-scale iron production. At Seriphos, there is evidence suggesting ancient metallurgists may have discovered simpler environmental methods to achieve partially similar thermal effects over 1,000 years earlier. No reconstruction experiment has perfectly reproduced the slag signatures found on Seriphos using only conventional Bronze Age furnace designs. Some slag samples also contain unusually low levels of unprocessed iron residue, suggesting highly efficient extraction rates. This implies that the metallurgists were not merely reaching high temperatures accidentally. They may have possessed refined control over smelting conditions and ore preparation techniques. Certain ore fragments appear intentionally sorted before processing, possibly indicating an early understanding of mineral grading. Waste deposits on the island are often layered systematically rather than dumped randomly, implying organized industrial procedures rather than crude extraction. Another mystery involves the mine ventilation systems. Deep underground mining presents a major danger due to heat buildup, oxygen depletion, and toxic fumes. Modern underground operations rely heavily on engineered airflow systems. Yet at Seriphos, some shafts appear positioned in ways that create passive air circulation through temperature and pressure differences between tunnel openings at different elevations. Researchers studying airflow simulations inside portions of the ancient mine network found that some tunnels could naturally channel cool air downward while expelling hot air upward through secondary openings. This passive ventilation mechanism resembles principles later formalized in industrial mine engineering. Whether ancient miners intentionally designed these systems or discovered them through centuries of empirical observation remains unknown. Transportation presents another unresolved engineering puzzle. Seriphos is mountainous and steep, yet enormous quantities of ore had to be moved from inland mines to coastal loading points. Archaeologists have identified ancient transport paths cut into bedrock with surprisingly regular grooves. Some historians believe these channels may have guided sled systems or wooden carts. Others suggest lubricated wooden runners may have been used to slide heavy ore downhill, using gravity-assisted transport methods. Several routes descend at gradients that modern engineers consider unusually optimized for controlled movement of heavy loads without catastrophic acceleration. This is particularly striking because similar principles are seen in some later Roman and medieval mining operations, but are rarely documented this early in the Aegean world. The scale of labor required for the mines was also immense. ancient records and archaeological evidence suggest Seriphos relied heavily on enslaved labourers who worked in brutal, underground conditions. In some shafts, the tunnels narrow dramatically, forcing workers to crawl through confined passages while extracting ore under dangerous conditions. Human remains and tool fragments indicate that mining accidents were likely common. The mines were not only engineering achievements, they were also places of extreme suffering that powered ancient economies through relentless extraction. What makes Seriphos especially mysterious is that much of this apparent technical knowledge seems to disappear or fragment over time. Although later civilizations continued mining throughout the Mediterranean, some specific features seen at Seriphos do not appear widely replicated at the same level of efficiency. Historians debate whether this knowledge was closely guarded by specialized mining communities, or whether the collapse of trade systems and population shifts caused entire bodies of practical engineering knowledge to vanish. What do you think really happened at Seriphos ancient mines? Did the ancient miners of Seriphos possess engineering knowledge far beyond their time, or are modern historians still underestimating the true capabilities of ancient civilizations? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Southeastern Bulgaria hides a quiet mound known as Karanovo, where archaeologists uncovered evidence of something deeply unsettling, an agricultural society more than 7,000 years old that may have possessed construction techniques, thermal engineering, and material knowledge far beyond what should have existed in Neolithic Europe. Long before the pyramids of Egypt, before Stonehenge, before the first dynasties of Mesopotamia, people at Karanovo were building settlements that repeatedly survived fire, climate shifts, and centuries of occupation in ways researchers still struggle to fully explain. The site was first systematically excavated in the 1930s by Bulgarian archaeologist Vasil Mikov. What appeared to be a simple prehistoric mound turned out to contain one of the most important stratified archaeological records in Europe. Layer after layer revealed nearly uninterrupted occupation from approximately 6,200 BCE to 2000 BCE. The mound eventually rose more than 13 meters high, purely from human habitation debris accumulated over millennia. Archaeologists identified 7 major cultural phases now known collectively as the Karanovo culture sequence, which became one of the chronological foundations for dating prehistoric southeastern Europe. But the deeper researchers dug, the stranger the site became. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Karanovo is the extraordinary durability of its clay architecture. At first glance, the houses appear primitive, timber frames coated with mud and clay, similar to many Neolithic settlements across Europe. Under microscopic analysis, however, many of these structures show signs of partial vitrification, a process in which intense heat transforms clay into a ceramic-like material. Some wall fragments and floors display hardness approaching low-grade fired brick, despite being over 6,000 years old. This should not have happened naturally. Experimental archaeology suggests ordinary house fires in prehistoric settlements usually reach temperatures between 500 and 700 degrees Celsius before collapsing. Yet several Karanovo samples indicate thermal exposure possibly exceeding 900 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, clay minerals begin to undergo major structural transformations. Quartz particles expand, iron compounds oxidize differently, the material becomes significantly more water-resistant and mechanically stable. The mystery is not simply that the buildings burned. Entire ancient cities burned throughout history. The mystery is why many Karanovo structures became stronger after destruction. Researchers have proposed multiple explanations. One theory suggests accidental proto-ceramic engineering. If the builders repeatedly mixed clay with precise ratios of organic material, ash, straw, and fine sediment, then large settlement fires could unintentionally create hardened surfaces similar to kiln-fired ceramics. Another hypothesis argues the process may not have been accidental at all. Some archaeologists suspect certain structures were intentionally heat-treated, possibly through controlled burning during construction or renovation. The implications are enormous. If intentional, this would mean Neolithic Balkan societies understood thermal modification of building materials thousands of years before the widespread appearance of fired brick architecture in Mesopotamia. The oldest large-scale fired bricks in cities like generally date much later, around the 4th millennium BCE. Karanovo may represent an entirely separate technological pathway that disappeared before evolving into later monumental architecture. Even more puzzling is the moisture resistance of some surviving floors. Parts of the settlement remained structurally stable despite lying underground for more than 6 millennia in fluctuating humidity conditions. Soil analyses revealed compacted clay mixtures with unusually low permeability. Modern researchers comparing them with traditional adobe structures found some Karanovo samples resisted water penetration significantly better than expected for unfired Neolithic earth architecture. No written formula survives explaining how this was achieved. The technological anomalies do not end with construction materials. Karanovo existed during a period when the Balkans were emerging as one of the earliest metallurgical centers on Earth. Copper artifacts discovered throughout the region date to the 5th millennium BCE, placing Balkan metallurgy among the oldest known anywhere in the world. Some nearby sites associated with the broader cultural sphere produced evidence of copper smelting earlier than many regions traditionally considered cradles of civilization. This presents another difficult question. Extracting copper from ore is not a simple process. Sulfide ores require controlled oxygen flow and carefully maintained temperatures. Primitive open fires are inefficient for achieving consistent metal separation. Yet slag remains and furnace traces from the Balkan Copper Age suggest increasingly sophisticated thermal control. Certain furnace fragments show internal vitrification patterns implying prolonged exposure to high heat within semi-enclosed environments. In other words, these communities may already have been experimenting with engineered combustion systems over 6,000 years ago. Compared to later Bronze Age metallurgy, the scale was still small, but technologically the leap was massive. Humanity was transitioning from shaping stone to manipulating the atomic structure of minerals through heat. At Karanovo and surrounding Balkan settlements, that transition appears to have begun startlingly early. Another unresolved mystery involves symbolic markings discovered on pottery, ritual objects, and seals. Some symbols resemble geometric patterns found across southeastern Europe during the Vinca and Karanovo cultural phases. Certain researchers argue these signs may represent a form of proto-writing predating Sumerian cuneiform by more than 1,000 years. The debate remains highly controversial. Skeptics argue the symbols are merely decorative or religious motifs. But supporters of the proto-writing hypothesis point to repeated symbol combinations, standardized incisions, and recurring sequences across multiple sites separated by large distances. Some signs appear in nearly identical forms over centuries, suggesting a shared symbolic system rather than a random artistic expression. One artifact in particular continues to fuel speculation, the so-called Karanovo seal. Covered with arranged geometric symbols in circular formation, the object has been interpreted by different researchers as a ritual calendar, astronomical marker, ownership seal, or ceremonial device linked to agricultural cycles. Its symmetry is difficult to ignore. Some investigators noticed possible correlations between the radial divisions on the seal and lunar or seasonal intervals important for early farming societies. While no interpretation has achieved consensus, the object demonstrates an unexpectedly advanced level of abstract symbolic organization for a Neolithic culture, traditionally portrayed as technologically primitive. Trade networks connected to Caranovo create yet another layer of mystery. Archaeologists found materials that could not have originated locally, including Mediterranean shells and obsidian transported across hundreds of kilometers. Obsidian sourcing studies indicate long-distance exchange systems operating across southeastern Europe during the Neolithic period. Maintaining such networks should have been extremely difficult. This was a world without wheeled transport on a large scale, without formal states and without written contracts. Yet goods, raw materials, and possibly ideas moved across vast regions with surprising consistency. To sustain this level of exchange, communities would have needed surplus food production, social coordination, and systems of trust sophisticated enough to connect distant populations over generations. Modern depictions often portray Neolithic Europe as isolated farming villages barely surviving season to season. Caranovo tells a very different story. Do you think Caranovo was simply an advanced Neolithic settlement, or evidence of forgotten knowledge humanity completely lost thousands of years ago? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In western Syria, near the Orontes River, the ruins of Apamea stretch across the landscape like the remains of a lost machine. Columns still stand in endless rows. Giant mosaics remain vivid after nearly 2,000 years. Underground water systems continue to function beneath shattered stone. And despite earthquakes powerful enough to destroy entire cities, parts of Apamea somehow survived far longer than engineers expected. The city was rediscovered gradually during Ottoman and early French archaeological surveys in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Excavations later revealed one of the largest Roman urban centers in the Middle East, covering more than 250 hectares and once housing an estimated population of over 100,000 people. But the deeper archaeologists dug, the stranger Apamea became. Apamea's most famous structure is its great colonnaded street, a massive avenue stretching nearly 2 kilometers. More than 1,200 columns once lined the road, many standing over 9 meters tall. From the air, the avenue appears astonishingly straight, even though the terrain beneath it is uneven and earthquake-prone. Modern engineers studying Roman surveying methods admit that maintaining such alignment over that distance would have required advanced geometric planning. Some measured sections deviate by only a few centimeters across hundreds of meters. That level of precision is difficult even with modern optical tools. Yet Roman engineers achieved it nearly 2,000 years ago using instruments like the groma and chorobates. What makes Apamea unusual is that the road was not built on stable bedrock. Geological studies show the area sits near active seismic zones connected to the Dead Sea Transform fault system. In theory, centuries of tectonic activity should have distorted the avenue far more severely. Instead, excavations revealed layered foundations beneath parts of the street. Archaeologists discovered crushed stone bedding mixed with compacted sediment capable of dispersing stress and absorbing minor ground movement. Some engineers compare this to primitive seismic buffering systems used in modern construction. This is one reason Apamea is often compared to places like Baalbek or Pompeii, cities where Roman engineering appears far more sophisticated than standard historical narratives suggest. The scale of Apamea's construction creates another unresolved mystery. Many of the city's columns were carved from granite and basalt weighing several tons each, yet suitable quarries are located far from the site. Transporting a single granite column in antiquity was already a major logistical challenge. Transporting more than 1,000 seems almost impossible. Historians believe Roman builders used sledges, rollers, cranes, and teams of animals. However, calculations based on column weight suggest some pieces may have required hundreds of workers simultaneously. Even then, moving them across unstable terrain would have been extraordinarily dangerous. The mystery deepens when examining the precision of the stonework itself. Some columns contain symmetrical grooves and finishing marks so consistent that archaeologists suspect highly specialized cutting techniques. Experimental archaeology using reconstructed Roman tools often struggles to reproduce the same level of uniformity efficiently. Similar debates exist at Karnak and the granite quarries of Aswan, where ancient builders transported monoliths weighing hundreds of tons. Apamea may not match those extremes in size, but the scale of coordination remains staggering. What kind of organizational system allowed an ancient city to manage engineering projects at near-industrial levels centuries before modern machinery? One of Apamea's least discussed mysteries lies underground. Beneath the streets, archaeologists uncovered an extensive hydraulic network composed of drainage channels, reservoirs, and water distribution systems. Some sections still maintain structural integrity after nearly 2 millennia. Roman hydraulic engineering is already famous through aqueducts like those in Segovia, but Apamea demonstrates something even more complex: adaptation to seismic instability. Water channels beneath the city were built with carefully calculated gradients. If the slope became too steep, erosion would destroy the system. Too shallow, and water stagnation would occur. Yet many surviving sections maintain nearly ideal flow geometry. Researchers studying the mortar used in these channels identified compounds similar to Roman pozzolanic concrete. Laboratory analysis suggests the material contained volcanic ash and lime mixtures capable of resisting water penetration and chemical decay. Some Roman marine concretes have even shown evidence of becoming stronger over time due to mineral reactions with water. At Apamea, traces of unusual waterproof coatings were discovered along certain channels. Their exact composition remains debated, but some specialists believe local engineers modified standard Roman formulas to handle Syria's temperature fluctuations and mineral-rich groundwater. In modern engineering terms, parts of Apamea's water system display an understanding of hydrostatic pressure and erosion control far beyond what many expect from the ancient world. Syria has suffered devastating earthquakes throughout recorded history. One of the worst struck Apamea in 1157 CE, destroying much of the city. Yet several structures endured surprisingly well. Detailed surveys of fallen columns revealed that many were not rigidly fixed together. Instead, some blocks appear to have been intentionally designed with slight movement tolerance. Small gaps and metal connectors may have allowed structures to flex during seismic activity rather than shatter instantly. This principle resembles modern earthquake engineering systems known as base isolation, where buildings absorb movement instead of resisting it rigidly. Ancient builders in other seismic regions used similar concepts. At Machu Picchu, Inca stone walls survive earthquakes because their interlocking stones shift slightly without collapsing. In Japan, traditional wooden pagodas used flexible central columns to absorb seismic waves. But Apamea's methods are unusual because they appear within massive Roman stone architecture, which is typically associated with rigidity rather than flexibility. Some archaeologists argue the Romans learned seismic adaptation techniques from local Syrian builders who understood regional geology better than imperial architects arriving from Europe. If true, Apamea may preserve evidence of lost collaboration between Roman engineering and indigenous Near Eastern construction knowledge. The greatest mystery of Apamea may be its mosaics. The city produced some of the largest Roman mosaics ever discovered. One famous mosaic, uncovered in the 1960s, measured more than 120 square meters and depicted mythological scenes with extraordinary detail. Even after centuries underground, many colors remained shockingly vivid. This should not happen. Pigments exposed to moisture, salts, oxidation, and temperature shifts normally degrade over time. Yet many tesserae from Apamea still display strong reds, blues, blacks, and gold-like tones after nearly 2,000 years. Scientific analysis revealed that artisans used highly purified minerals and advanced firing methods. Red colours likely came from iron oxides heated under carefully controlled oxygen conditions. Black tesserae may have used manganese-rich compounds resistant to fading. Some blue pigments show similarities to Egyptian blue, one of history's earliest synthetic pigments. Egyptian blue itself is extraordinary. Modern studies discovered it emits infrared luminescence invisible to the human eye, meaning ancient craftsmen accidentally created a material with properties now studied for advanced optics and security technologies. At Apamea, researchers believe mosaic workshops achieved comparable chemical sophistication. The tesserae also display astonishing uniformity. Millions of tiny cubes were cut to nearly identical dimensions. Producing that level of consistency manually would require an enormous labor force and strict quality control. Some historians compare the organization of Apamea's mosaic workshops to proto-industrial production systems. Teams may have specialized separately in quarrying, pigment preparation, kiln firing, cutting, transport, and assembly. Even more mysterious is the durability of the binding materials. Microscopic studies found certain mortars retained remarkable adhesion despite centuries of seismic activity and environmental stress. Modern restorers often struggle to recreate the same longevity. And there's another unsettling possibility. Some archaeologists suspect many surviving mosaics were never intended as simple decoration. Their geometric arrangements, repeated astronomical motifs, and symbolic symmetry suggest encoded religious or cosmological meanings now largely lost. If that interpretation is correct, then Apamea's mosaics were not merely art. They were engineered surfaces carrying cultural, mathematical, and symbolic information across centuries. What do you think is the most mysterious part of Apamea? The earthquake-resistant engineering, the impossible logistics, or the mosaics whose colours still refuse to die? Let us know in the comments below. Carved into a near-vertical cliff in the mountains of central Anatolia, Kapilakaya Rock Tomb remains one of the strangest funerary structures ever created in the ancient world. The tomb sits roughly 27 kilometers northwest of the modern city of Çorum in Turkey, suspended high above a narrow rocky valley. Archaeologists believe it was constructed during the Hellenistic period, most likely in the 2nd century BCE, when Anatolia was controlled by successor kingdoms that emerged after Alexander the Great, the Ai. Unlike most rock-cut tombs that were built into hillsides with broad access routes, Kapilakaya was carved directly into an isolated cliff face, more than 20 meters above the valley floor. The structure first drew systematic archaeological attention during surveys of central Anatolian rock monuments in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But even after decades of study, researchers still cannot fully explain how ancient builders completed such precise work in such an impossible location. The tomb's name roughly translates to rock gate, an appropriate title for a structure that looks less like a grave and more like a doorway suspended between worlds. The greatest mystery surrounding Kapilakaya is not the tomb itself, but the engineering challenge of creating it. The facade was cut into a vertical limestone wall with almost no natural standing platform beneath it. Even modern climbers require artificial pathways and support systems to approach the structure safely. Yet ancient workers somehow transported tools, removed massive amounts of stone, and maintained architectural symmetry while hanging above a steep ravine. This immediately raises a disturbing question. How did ancient engineers stabilize an entire workforce on a cliff face over 2,000 years ago? Researchers estimate that several dozen tons of limestone had to be removed to create both the exterior facade and the burial chamber inside. In modern quarry operations, That scale of excavation would normally require cranes, scaffolding anchors, and controlled debris removal systems. But at Kapilakaya, archaeologists found surprisingly little evidence of large permanent anchor points that would normally support giant scaffold systems. Some scholars believe the builders may have used suspended wooden platforms attached to removable beams inserted into temporary holes in the rock. Similar methods were later documented in medieval cliff monasteries in places such as Meteora in Greece. However, Kapilakaya predates many of those examples by centuries, suggesting that ancient Anatolian builders may have possessed sophisticated vertical construction techniques that history barely recorded. The facade of Kapilakaya follows a remarkably balanced Hellenistic design. Its entrance is framed by carved architectural details resembling a miniature temple facade, including symmetrical recesses and geometric proportions carefully aligned into the uneven natural cliff. This level of precision becomes far more mysterious when considering the working conditions. In ordinary stone architecture, builders can step back and visually measure symmetry from a distance. At Kapilakaya, workers hanging from a cliff would have had almost no opportunity to view the entire facade directly while carving it, yet the structure maintains proportional balance with deviations small enough to suggest deliberate geometric planning. Some engineers have proposed that ancient builders may have used suspended plumbline systems combined with wooden measurement grids. Similar alignment principles were used in Egyptian pyramid construction, where deviations from true alignment were sometimes less than 0.05 degrees. While Kapilakaya is much smaller than Giza, the same mathematical challenge appears here, maintaining precision without modern surveying equipment. What makes the mystery deeper is the absence of written records describing the techniques used. One of the most overlooked mysteries is the missing debris. Creating the burial chamber required excavating enormous amounts of limestone from inside the cliff. Geological estimates suggest that at least 15 to 20 cubic meters of rock were removed. Limestone weighs approximately 2.3 to 2.7 tons per cubic meter, meaning ancient workers may have extracted more than 40 tons of material. But where did it go? The narrow terrain beneath the tomb does not contain the expected accumulation of excavation debris. If the stone had simply been thrown downward during construction, large deposits should still exist nearby. Instead, archaeologists believe the material was deliberately transported away. That creates another engineering problem. Removing dozens of tons of broken stone from a cliffside with limited access would have required organized lifting systems, rope networks, or temporary ramps. Similar logistical puzzles appear at Petra in Jordan, where the Nabateans carved entire facades into sandstone cliffs while somehow managing massive waste removal operations in confined canyon systems. At Kapilakaya, however, the working space was even more restricted. Perhaps the most astonishing fact is that the tomb still survives. Central Anatolia experiences temperature extremes capable of cracking limestone over centuries. The region is also affected by seismic activity linked to fault systems across Turkey. Normally, cutting a deep cavity into a vertical rock wall weakens natural stress distribution and increases the risk of collapse. Yet Kapilakaya has remained standing for over 2 millennia. Modern geological analysis suggests that the builders may have intentionally selected a section of limestone with unusually stable fracture patterns. Some engineers believe the ancient masons understood, at least intuitively, how stress lines moved through rock formations. By avoiding critical load-bearing zones, they may have prevented catastrophic cracking. This mirrors mysteries found in other ancient rock-cut sites such as Petra, Lalibela, and the Lycian tombs of southwestern Anatolia. In many of these locations, ancient builders demonstrated an ability to manipulate stone structures in ways that appear surprisingly advanced even by modern engineering standards. At Petra, for example, Erosion studies show that Nabatean engineers deliberately carved water channels and drainage systems to protect monuments from flash flooding. At Lalibela in Ethiopia, entire churches were isolated from surrounding rock while preserving structural stability with astonishing accuracy. Kapilakaya appears to belong to this same tradition of forgotten stone engineering. A narrow stairway carved directly into the cliff leads toward the tomb entrance. The steps are extremely small and steep, forcing visitors to move carefully even today. This creates another unresolved mystery. If the tomb was intended for repeated ceremonies or family visitation, the access route seems impractical. Transporting a body, funerary goods, or ritual offerings up such a dangerous path would have been extraordinarily difficult. Some archaeologists therefore suspect that the location itself held symbolic importance. In Hellenistic belief systems, elevated tombs often represented separation between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. By placing the burial chamber high above the valley, isolated from ordinary human movement, the builders may have been creating a literal transition into another spiritual domain. But this symbolic interpretation only deepens the engineering puzzle. Why invest such enormous labor into constructing a tomb that was intentionally difficult to access? Inside the chamber, several surfaces remain surprisingly flat despite being carved into hard limestone using Iron Age tools. The tool marks indicate a highly organized carving process. First rough extraction, then leveling, then final refinement. This sequence sounds simple until one considers the conditions under which the workers operated. Maintaining controlled hammer strikes while suspended on unstable platforms would have required immense physical precision and coordination. Experimental archaeologists attempting to recreate similar carving techniques discovered that even minor instability can produce uneven cuts and dangerous cracking. Yet many surfaces inside Kapilakaya remain remarkably consistent. This has led some researchers to argue that ancient and Aetolian stoneworkers possess specialized cliff carving methods passed down through generations of master builders, techniques almost completely lost today because ancient construction manuals rarely survived. Do you think Kapilakaya was simply an ancient tomb or evidence of construction knowledge that modern history still cannot fully explain? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The wind coming off the South China Sea should have destroyed Posa Inu centuries ago. Salt-filled air, tropical heat, violent monsoon storms, and shifting coastal soil should have reduced these red brick towers to dust long before the modern age. Yet on a hill overlooking Phan Thiet in southern Vietnam, the towers still stand after more than 1,100 years. Even stranger, modern engineers still cannot fully explain how the ancient Cham civilization built them. The towers were first documented in detail during French colonial surveys in the late 19th century, though local Cham communities had protected and worshipped the site for centuries. Archaeological excavations later revealed that Posa Inu was likely constructed between the late 8th and early 9th centuries under the Champa Kingdom, a powerful maritime civilization that controlled major trade routes across Southeast Asia. But the deeper researchers looked into the towers, the more impossible the engineering appeared. At first glance, Posa Inu appears simple, red brick towers dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva. But the closer researchers examined the walls, the more disturbing the construction became. The bricks fit together so tightly that in many areas, mortar lines are nearly invisible. Modern scans have shown gaps between some bricks measuring less than 1 millimeter. Even today, achieving that level of precision across an entire monument without industrial cutting tools would be difficult. Scientists studying Cham architecture discovered something even stranger. In many places, the outer surfaces of adjacent bricks appear partially fused together, almost as if the towers had been heated after construction. This led to one controversial theory. The Cham may have assembled the structures first, and then fired the entire building at extremely high temperatures. Other researchers propose that the builders used an organic resin or plant-based adhesive capable of chemically bonding the bricks over time. Chemical analyses have identified traces of silica, iron oxides, and possible organic compounds between certain brick joints, though no definitive formula has ever been replicated successfully. What makes the mystery more significant is comparison with modern restoration attempts. During several conservation projects in the 20th century, engineers tried reproducing cham bricks using contemporary kilns. Many of those replacement bricks deteriorated faster than the originals within only decades. The ancient materials consistently showed better resistance to moisture absorption and surface cracking. The same mystery appears at my Sun Sanctuary, another cham site, but Posai Inu presents an even harsher environmental challenge because of its direct exposure to coastal salt air. This is the greatest mystery surrounding Posai Inu. The towers stand only a short distance from the sea, exposed to one of the most destructive combinations for ancient masonry: heat, humidity, salt crystallization, and monsoon rain. In coastal environments, salt particles enter microscopic pores inside brick and stone. As temperatures rise, the salt crystallizes and expands, slowly breaking the material apart from the inside. This process destroys modern concrete, steel, and brick structures around the world. Ancient Mediterranean ports, Roman seawalls, and even reinforced modern buildings suffer from salt corrosion over time. Yet Posai Inu survived for more than a millennium. Laboratory tests performed on cham bricks from multiple sites revealed unusually low water absorption rates compared to many traditional handmade bricks. Some samples absorbed less than 10% water by weight, an extraordinary figure for ancient porous masonry. Researchers also discovered highly stable microstructures inside the fired clay, suggesting extremely precise temperature control during production. The cham builders may have mastered a firing technique capable of altering the internal pore distribution of the bricks. Instead of trapping moisture, the microscopic channels may have allowed controlled evaporation while preventing destructive salt accumulation. This creates a paradox. Normally, highly porous bricks absorb too much water and decay rapidly. Dense bricks resist water but crack under thermal stress. Cham bricks appear to achieve both flexibility and durability simultaneously. Some material scientists believe the iron-rich clay used by the cham played a crucial role. When fired under carefully controlled oxygen conditions, iron compounds can create ceramic bonds that strengthen resistance against thermal shock and salt penetration. Similar effects are seen in certain advanced refractory ceramics used today in industrial furnaces. Thermal imaging studies at cham tower sites also revealed another anomaly. Interior temperatures inside the towers often remain noticeably cooler than the external environment during peak daytime heat. The difference can reach several degrees Celsius despite the lack of visible ventilation systems. Researchers suspect the towers may function as passive thermal regulators. The thick walls, narrow chambers, layered brick arrangement, and hidden airflow channels could create slow convection cycles that stabilize interior temperatures naturally. Modern green architecture uses similar passive cooling principles, but Posai Inu achieved this over 1,000 years ago without computers, steel frameworks, or climate engineering software. Even more mysterious is the outer surface erosion pattern. Many original bricks still retain sharp edges despite centuries of abrasive coastal wind carrying sand and salt particles. Some engineers compare the durability to Roman pozzolanic concrete, famous for surviving marine environments for over 2,000 years. But unlike Roman concrete, the exact cham formula remains unknown. The tower should not still be standing. Posai Inu was built on elevated terrain exposed to seasonal storms and centuries of soil movement, yet the structures remain remarkably stable despite their narrow vertical form. Archaeological surveys reveal that the foundations are not especially deep compared to modern engineering standards. Instead, stability appears to come from load distribution. The towers use thick outer walls combined with hollow internal chambers. This reduces total mass while maintaining compressive strength. The vertical brick arrangement may also function like an interlocking force network, distributing stress downward evenly across the structure. Some engineers have compared this principle to seismic resistance systems seen in Inca stonework in Peru, where structures survive earthquakes through controlled flexibility rather than rigidity. At Posa Inu, the towers show evidence of minor movement adaptation instead of catastrophic cracking. Tiny shifts may have been absorbed gradually through the brick joints themselves. This raises a disturbing possibility. The Cham builders may have understood dynamic structural behavior centuries before formal engineering mathematics existed in the region. Many carvings and protrusions on the towers appear decorative, but several researchers suspect they were functional. Vertical grooves along the walls may help channel rainwater away from vulnerable joints. Certain projecting elements could reduce thermal expansion stress by interrupting surface heat distribution. False doors and recessed chambers may also influence airflow and internal pressure balance. In modern architecture, these ideas are part of environmental engineering. At Posa Inu, they may have been integrated directly into religious symbolism. The result is a structure where art and engineering are impossible to separate. Like many Cham religious structures, Posa Inu may have been aligned according to celestial observations connected to Hindu cosmology. Researchers studying the orientation of Cham temples found recurring relationships between tower entrances, solar movement, and ritual timing. Certain alignments may have marked seasonal transitions important for agriculture and maritime navigation. This was critical for Champa, a civilization deeply connected to ocean trade. Historical records describe Cham sailors traveling across Southeast Asia long before modern navigational instruments became common in the region. If Posa Inu also functioned as a symbolic astronomical marker, then the towers were not merely temples. They were instruments linking religion, navigation, and environmental observation together. What do you think the Cham builders truly understood about heat, salt, and ancient materials over 1,100 years ago? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Shengavit's settlement preserves the remains of a Bronze Age settlement that should not have existed at its time. More than 5,000 years ago, while most ancient communities were still small farming villages, Shengavit already possessed stone fortifications, organized workshops, advanced metallurgy, and strangely precise ceramic technology. Even today, archaeologists still cannot fully explain how a settlement this old achieved such engineering sophistication. The site was first excavated in 1936 by Armenian archaeologist Yevgeny Bayburdian. Later excavations uncovered thick defensive walls, industrial furnaces, storage systems, and thousands of artifacts linked to the mysterious Kura Araxes culture, a civilization that spread across nearly 1 million square kilometers from the Caucasus to the Levant between roughly 3,500 and 2,200 BCE. What shocked researchers was not just Shengavit's age, but how technologically organized it appeared compared to other settlements from the same era. Most Bronze Age settlements from the 4th millennium BCE were temporary mud brick villages. Shengavit was different. Its residents constructed circular and rectangular stone buildings using volcanic basalt, one of the hardest local materials available. Some outer defensive walls reached nearly 4 meters thick, while archaeologists also discovered layered flooring systems designed to stabilize structures on uneven volcanic terrain. In several homes, researchers identified raised storage platforms, central heating hearths, ventilation gaps, and carefully separated production spaces suggesting that the settlement was planned with surprising attention to airflow, heat distribution, and long-term durability. What makes this even stranger is the seismic environment of the Armenian highlands. Modern Armenia experiences frequent earthquakes, yet many Shengavit foundations remained structurally stable for more than 5 millennia. Engineers studying the ruins noticed similarities to primitive anti-seismic construction techniques, including thick low-center walls, curved layouts for weight distribution, and flexible stone stacking without rigid mortar. Comparable earthquake-resistant concepts would later appear in Inca architecture thousands of years later in Peru, but Shengavit predates those methods by nearly 3,000 years. Some researchers believe the builders developed these techniques through generations of observing tectonic activity, while others argue the structural precision seems too advanced for a society supposedly still in the early Bronze Age. One of Shengavit's greatest enigmas lies beneath its workshops. Excavations revealed large-scale metal production areas containing slag, crucibles, molds, and furnace remains. But the real mystery is the alloy itself. The inhabitants were producing arsenical bronze centuries before tin bronze became widespread across much of the ancient world. Arsenical bronze forms when copper is combined with arsenic-bearing minerals, creating a metal significantly harder than pure copper, with improved edge retention, greater durability, and stronger resistance to deformation. Modern experiments have shown that arsenical bronze can approach hardness levels close to early tin bronze under carefully controlled conditions. The problem is that heating arsenic ores releases toxic arsenic oxide gas. Even brief exposure can cause severe poisoning, while long-term exposure damages the lungs, skin, and nervous system. Yet Shengavit appears to have operated these furnaces continuously. Some furnace chambers reached estimated temperatures between 1,100 and 1,200 degrees Celsius, requiring controlled oxygen flow, specialized charcoal production, and carefully engineered furnace insulation. Researchers still debate how Shengavit metallurgists maintained such temperatures consistently without advanced bellows systems known from later civilizations. One theory suggests naturally windy canyon conditions near the Hrazdan River may have helped generate forced air combustion, while another proposes the existence of leather air pumps or multi-stage furnace chambers that have not survived archaeologically. What remains unexplained is how a prehistoric society mastered a toxic alloying process that even later civilizations struggled to control safely. Among all Shengavit mysteries, none confuses archaeologists more than its famous black and red ceramics. The pottery of the Kura Araxes culture is instantly recognizable for its glossy black upper surfaces, deep red lower bodies, razor-sharp geometric symmetry, and remarkably consistent firing quality. At first glance, the vessels appear decorative, but reproducing them has proven unexpectedly difficult, even for modern experimental archaeologists. To create this dual-color effect, ancient potters had to manipulate oxygen levels inside the kiln with extraordinary precision. During firing, oxygen-rich conditions produced the red coloration through iron oxidation, while oxygen-starved conditions created black surfaces through carbon reduction. The transition between these phases had to occur at exactly the right temperature and timing. Even small variations could ruin the entire batch. Experimental reconstructions have shown that maintaining this thermal balance without modern instruments is extremely unstable, yet Shengavit pottery achieved near-industrial consistency. Thousands of ceramic fragments display almost identical coloration, uniform wall thickness, highly standardized shapes, and repeating geometric patterns with minimal deviation. Some ceramic specialists argue this suggests standardized measurement systems, specialized master craftsmen, or even kiln designs far more advanced than expected for the period. The firing temperatures themselves are also remarkable. Scientific analysis indicates some ceramics exceeded 900 degrees Celsius, hot enough to partially vitrify surface minerals and significantly increase durability. Certain vessels still retain polish and pigmentation after more than 5,000 years buried underground. When compared to many contemporary ceramics from Mesopotamia or Anatolia, Shengavit pottery often shows better thermal control, sharper symmetry, and lower defect rates. This has led some historians to describe Kura-Araxes ceramics as one of the earliest examples of mass-standardized craft production in human history. But the greatest mystery is not the pottery itself. It is the knowledge required to create it repeatedly without written chemistry, thermometers, or modern kiln engineering. Artifacts discovered at Shengavit suggest connections extending across enormous distances. Obsidian analysis revealed volcanic glass transported from multiple source regions throughout the Armenian highlands, while carnelian beads likely originated far to the south. Certain metallurgical styles resemble techniques later found in Anatolia and northern Mesopotamia. The Kura-Araxes cultural horizon eventually stretched across Armenia, Georgia, eastern Turkey, northwestern Iran, Syria, and parts of the Levant, covering nearly 1 million square kilometers. Yet archaeologists found no evidence of a centralized empire. There are no royal palaces, no monumental kings, and no massive military inscriptions. Instead, the culture spread almost invisibly through pottery styles, metallurgy, architecture, and manufacturing systems. Some scholars compare this phenomenon to a prehistoric technological network rather than a traditional kingdom. It may have functioned through migrating craftsmen, interregional trade partnerships, or shared industrial knowledge moving between settlements over generations. In some ways, Shengavit resembles an ancient manufacturing hub operating inside a decentralized Bronze Age world. The scale of specialization at Shengavit raises another unresolved question: how was labor organized? The settlement supported metalworkers, potters, stonemasons, textile producers, food storage managers, and long-distance traders. This level of specialization normally appears in societies with strong centralized authority, yet Shengavit lacks obvious signs of kingship. Archaeologists have not identified royal tombs, administrative palaces, or written bureaucratic systems comparable to Mesopotamia. Despite this, production remained highly standardized. Some researchers believe Shengavit may represent an early form of cooperative urban organization, a society capable of large-scale industrial coordination without rigid monarchy. If true, it would challenge long-standing assumptions about how the first complex societies developed. What do you think really happened to Shengavit? Was it destroyed by climate collapse, abandoned after trade networks failed? Or did an advanced Bronze Age culture simply vanish and take its knowledge with it? Share your theory in the comments below. In the Andes Mountains of Peru, nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, an enormous plateau covered with giant human faces, animal figures, and impossible stone formations continues to divide archaeologists, geologists, and ancient history researchers. Marcoassi does not look like a normal archaeological site. It looks like an entire mountain range deliberately transformed into a hidden stone archive by a civilization nobody can identify. Some formations appear only at sunrise, others emerge only under moonlight, and the deeper researchers study the plateau, the harder it becomes to explain where nature ends and intentional design begins. Although local communities had known about Marcoassi for centuries, the site became internationally famous after Peruvian explorer Daniel Russo visited the plateau in 1952. Rousseau believed the formations were not random geological accidents, but remnants of a prehistoric civilization that existed thousands of years before the Inca. What shocked him most was the scale. The plateau stretches across roughly 4 square kilometers and contains hundreds of granite formations weighing thousands of tons each. Many resemble precise human profiles, giant condors, monkeys, turtles, lions, and strangely elongated faces. Rousseau argued that many of these images were only visible from exact observation points, almost like engineered optical illusions. Mainstream archaeologists rejected most of his conclusions, but even today Marcahuasi remains one of the few places on Earth where geology alone struggles to fully explain the consistency and complexity of the formations. The most disturbing theory surrounding Marcahuasi is the idea that the plateau was designed as a gigantic stone library, a monumental archive encoded directly into the landscape itself. Daniel Rousseau proposed that the site functioned as a prehistoric knowledge preservation system. According to his interpretation, the formations were not simply statues, but markers connected to astronomy, seasonal cycles, and possibly forgotten historical events. The theory sounds extreme, until researchers began comparing Marcahuasi to ancient astronomical complexes around the world. At Stonehenge, the stones align with solstice sunrise positions with remarkable precision. At Chankilo, a 2,300-year-old desert observatory tracks the sun across the horizon using 13 towers. At Nabta Playa, prehistoric stone circles appear aligned to celestial events thousands of years before the pyramids. Marcahuasi may be even stranger because the observatory is integrated directly into natural mountain terrain rather than constructed as separate monuments. Several formations cast unusual shadows during equinoxes and solstices. Certain profiles become visible only when sunlight strikes at low seasonal angles, while others appear complete only during sunrise or sunset in specific months of the year. This has led some researchers to suspect that the plateau may have been intentionally modified to interact with light itself. If true, the engineering implications are staggering. To create optical formations visible only from specific viewpoints, ancient builders would have needed an advanced understanding of perspective geometry, long-distance surveying methods, knowledge of seasonal solar movement, and precise control over massive granite surfaces. Modern optical illusion art, known as anamorphic projection, requires calculated viewing angles and spatial mathematics, yet Marcahuasi may contain mountain-scale examples created centuries or even millennia before formal geometry existed in the Andes. Even more mysterious is the recurring appearance of multi-face stones. Some formations transform into entirely different faces depending on the observer's location or the angle of sunlight. This phenomenon resembles modern image morphing techniques more than primitive rock carving. Skeptics argue this is simply pareidolia, the psychological tendency for humans to see faces in random patterns, but researchers counter that the probability of hundreds of coherent anthropomorphic shapes emerging naturally across a concentrated plateau is statistically difficult to dismiss entirely. Granite erosion normally produces fractures, rounded edges, and irregular weathering patterns. Marcahuasi, however, contains formations with unusually symmetrical eye cavities, jawlines, forehead contours, and proportional facial geometry. Some appear almost mathematically balanced. What deepens the mystery further is the absence of transitional evidence. Archaeologists have found no clear workshops, unfinished sculptures, or large tool deposits capable of explaining landscape-scale stone modification. It is as if the mountain itself became the monument. Marcahuasi is composed primarily of granite, one of the hardest stones ancient civilizations ever worked with. Granite ranks around 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, meaning it is significantly harder than bronze tools traditionally associated with early Andean cultures. This creates a major technological problem. Some formations display smooth curvature and apparent shaping across surfaces dozens of feet high. Creating such features intentionally would require enormous labor and remarkable precision, especially at an altitude exceeding 4,000 meters, where oxygen levels are roughly 40% lower than at sea level. Researchers often compare this mystery to the polygonal stone walls of Sacsayhuaman, the megalithic blocks of Ollantaytambo, and the statues of Rapa Nui National Park. But Marcahuasi differs in one critical way. Most of its structures remain fused directly into the mountain itself. This makes it nearly impossible to determine whether humans carved the formations or selectively modified naturally existing rock shapes. Some surfaces even appear partially melted or softened, leading fringe researchers to propose theories involving thermal treatment or lost mineral technologies. No scientific evidence confirms these theories, yet no universally accepted explanation fully accounts for the site either. One of the strangest phenomena at Marcahuasi occurs after sunset. Many formations that appear meaningless during daylight suddenly transform into recognizable faces under moonlight or low-angle illumination. Shadows create detailed facial contours that vanish entirely a few hours later. This has led some researchers to describe Marcahuasi as a form of optical architecture, where light and shadow are essential components of the design itself. Ancient civilizations elsewhere use similar principles. Abu Simbel aligns sunlight to illuminate inner statues only twice each year, while Chichen Itza creates the illusion of a serpent descending the pyramid during equinoxes. But Marcahuasi operates on an entirely different scale. Instead of temples, entire mountainsides participate in the illusion. This suggests either an extraordinary coincidence of geology or a level of prehistoric environmental engineering far beyond conventional assumptions. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Marcahuasi is the lack of supporting evidence. Ancient engineering sites usually leave traces such as quarries, tool fragments, transportation systems, settlements, or inscriptions. Marcahuasi leaves almost none. There are no surviving texts explaining its purpose, and no confirmed civilization has been definitively connected to the plateau. Carbon dating remains limited because the mystery centers on exposed stone rather than organic structures. This absence has created one of archaeology's most uncomfortable possibilities. If the site was intentionally modified, the people responsible may belong to a cultural phase almost completely erased from history. Some theories place the origins before the Inca, while others speculate connections to extremely ancient Andean cultures that existed long before recorded Peruvian civilizations emerged. Without direct evidence, mainstream archaeology remains cautious, but that caution has not solved the mystery. Do you think Marcahuasi is simply a natural geological illusion, or evidence of a forgotten civilization capable of engineering an entire mountain? Share your thoughts in the comments below. At the northern edge of Egypt's Fayum, depression lies Soknopayu Nessos, a lost Greco-Roman city swallowed by sand for nearly 2,000 years. Known today as Dimei el Siba, the site sits more than 80 kilometers southwest of Cairo near the ancient shores of Lake Moeris. Unlike most Egyptian settlements that depended directly on the Nile, Soknopayu Nessos was built deep inside an isolated desert basin where survival should have been nearly impossible. The ruins were first documented in detail during the late 19th century by explorers such as Grenfell and Hunt, who later uncovered enormous quantities of papyri preserved beneath the dry sand. Excavations throughout the 20th century revealed something unexpected. This was not a minor desert village, but a highly organized religious and economic center covering several hectares, complete with paved ceremonial roads, massive mud brick architecture, underground storage systems, and a monumental temple dedicated to the crocodile god Soknopaios. But the deeper archaeologists excavated, the stranger the city became. The greatest mystery was simple. How did a large urban population survive for centuries in one of the harshest environments in Roman Egypt? The first major mystery surrounding Soknopaiou Nessos is water. Modern Fayum is largely arid, and the northern desert surrounding the city receives almost no rainfall. Annual precipitation in the region today is often below 20 millimeters. Summer surface temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius, while evaporation rates are among the highest in North Africa. Under these conditions, sustaining a permanent settlement would normally require direct river access or advanced hydraulic infrastructure. Yet Soknopaiou Nessos flourished between roughly the 3rd century BCE and the 3rd century CE. Archaeological surveys discovered traces of canals, reservoirs, and carefully engineered water control systems buried beneath layers of sand. What puzzles researchers is the precision of these constructions. Some canals appear to maintain extremely subtle gradients over long distances, allowing water to move slowly without rapid loss from erosion or evaporation. Hydrologists comparing the site to Persian Qanat systems and Nabatean engineering at Petra have noted remarkable similarities in environmental adaptation. However, Soknopaiou Nessos existed in a very different geological setting. Fayum soil contains unstable sediments that shift constantly with wind activity. Maintaining long-term canal efficiency in such terrain would have required continual recalibration and advanced practical understanding of sediment movement. Satellite mapping and geological studies suggest the inhabitants may also have exploited fluctuations in the ancient Lake Moeris water level. During certain historical periods, the lake expanded significantly, potentially feeding hidden irrigation routes connected to agricultural zones outside the city. Some scholars believe the settlement functioned almost like a carefully balanced ecological machine, surviving only because its inhabitants mastered an unusually precise relationship between climate, groundwater, and seasonal flooding. Even today, researchers still debate exactly how the system worked. The layout of Soknopaiou Nessos raises another extraordinary possibility. The city may have been intentionally engineered to manipulate airflow and temperature. Unlike many ancient settlements that evolved organically over centuries, Soknopaiou Nessos followed a surprisingly rigid urban axis centered on the temple complex. Streets were narrow, walls were unusually tall, and residential clusters formed enclosed corridors that limited direct sunlight during the hottest hours of the day. Climate archaeologists studying the ruins have proposed that these arrangements created passive cooling effects similar to those used in traditional Middle Eastern wind tunnel architecture. By forcing desert winds through constricted passageways, the city may have generated localized pressure differences that reduced heat accumulation. Thermal studies of ancient mud brick structures show that dense earthen walls can delay heat transfer by several hours. In desert climates, this means interiors remain relatively cool during the day and release stored heat only after sunset. Some buildings at Soknopaiou Nessos appear optimized for exactly this effect. This has led to comparisons with later Persian Badgir wind towers and even certain Roman bath ventilation systems. But Soknopaiou Nessos predates many of those developments in North Africa. If the theories are correct, the city represents one of the earliest known examples of large-scale passive environmental engineering in a desert settlement. The mystery deepens when examining the temple road itself. The main ceremonial avenue appears aligned in a way that reduces direct sand accumulation from prevailing winds. Some archaeologists suspect the builders intentionally studied wind direction over long periods before construction began. That level of environmental planning would have been astonishing for its time. Most ancient mud brick cities deteriorate rapidly once abandoned. Wind erosion, thermal expansion, and salt crystallization gradually destroy exposed walls. Yet major sections of Soknopaiou Nessos remained standing for nearly 2 millennia despite extreme desert conditions. Material analysis revealed something unusual in the composition of certain bricks. Researchers identified mixtures containing varying ratios of clay, straw, mineral salts, and organic additives that may have improved structural flexibility under repeated temperature stress. Some bricks show microscopic resistance to cracking that exceeds what archaeologists normally expect from standard Greco-Roman mud brick construction. The phenomenon has drawn comparisons to other mysterious ancient building technologies, including Roman pozzolanic concrete and Persian sarouge mortar. Like those materials, the exact production methods at Soknopaiou Nessos remain uncertain because ancient manufacturing records are incomplete. One theory suggests local builders exploited Fayum's naturally saline sediments to create partial self-hardening effects inside the brick matrix. Another proposes that repeated cycles of controlled drying may have strengthened the material before construction. Whatever the explanation, the city demonstrates a level of practical materials engineering far beyond what many historians once assumed for remote desert settlements. Beneath the visible ruins lies one of the site's most controversial mysteries. Excavations uncovered networks of underground chambers, tunnels, and storage spaces extending below residential and ceremonial areas. Some rooms maintain noticeably lower temperatures than the desert surface, even during extreme summer heat. Measurements in similar subterranean desert structures show temperature differences of more than 10 degrees Celsius compared to surface conditions. This has led researchers to speculate that Soknopaiou Nessos may have used passive underground cooling systems for food preservation, document storage, or ritual activities. The theory is supported by one remarkable fact. Enormous quantities of papyri survived at the site in exceptional condition. Papyrus is extremely vulnerable to humidity fluctuations, biological decay, and thermal damage. Yet thousands of documents remained readable after nearly 2,000 years buried beneath the sand. The dry climate certainly contributed, but some archaeologists believe the storage architecture itself played a major role. Certain chambers appeared deliberately sealed from rapid airflow while maintaining stable underground temperatures. If intentional, this would represent a sophisticated understanding of microclimate control centuries before modern environmental storage science. The implications are extraordinary. Soknopaiou Nessos may not simply have been storing goods underground. It may have been engineering artificial preservation environments inside the desert itself. At the heart of the city stood the massive temple of Soknopaios, a crocodile deity associated with fertility, protection, and water. But the temple's architecture contains anomalies that continue to fuel debate. Researchers observe that sunlight enters certain parts of the temple at unusually precise seasonal angles. During particular times of the year, narrow shafts of light illuminate inner ceremonial spaces while surrounding chambers remain in darkness. This phenomenon has led to comparisons with Egyptian solar alignments at Abu Simbel, Dendera, and Karnak. However, Soknopaiou Nessos was far more isolated than those major religious centers. Some historians argue the alignments were symbolic, reinforcing the divine authority of the temple priesthood. Others believe they may have served practical calendrical purposes linked to agriculture and water management. No consensus exists because much of the upper temple structure has collapsed. Still, the surviving geometry strongly suggests intentional astronomical planning rather than coincidence. If true, the city combined hydraulic engineering, climate adaptation, and celestial observation into a single integrated urban system. What do you think really caused the sudden disappearance of Soknopaiou Nessos? Environmental collapse, economic decline, or a hidden factor we still haven't discovered? Share your theory in the comments below.